Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
It was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow.
Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. This is Kendra, and today I have co-host Christina with me, and we are here interviewing Myndee Tollefson, and just wanted to allow her to tell her story. She's got a great story that talks about a lot of things that many people in the church or a certain subset of people in the church may not have had the opportunity to feel heard, and her story will actually really touch on some of those things. Myndee has been through putting a child up for adoption and through church social services. And so there's more to her story, but we're just going to go ahead and let her take over and tell us her story in her own words. Welcome to our podcast, Myndee.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate being here a lot, and I'm really happy to be part of this and get kind of a story that isn't told very often out there, represent a voice for some of the people that might be resonating with this. So I guess in way of introduction of myself, I one of the first things I want to say is that I have a real understanding of generational trauma, and that I really, as I talk about my family and people in my life, I don't hold them responsible for any of their actions, because without any question in my mind, they have behaved in a way that is just looking for my best interest and love on the understanding and life experiences that they have. So as I just kind of want that as a caveat from the beginning, that not everybody, I mean, some of the things that I talk about that hurt me were never out of malice. So at any rate, so I'm the youngest of 6 kids. My dad is a CES teacher. I lived in Bountiful, Utah for most of my life, from 4 years old until we moved when I was 18. So all of my growing up years were all in Davis County, Bubble, Bountiful, Utah. So, and my dad taught in the same community and was an amazing teacher that really had a positive influence on a lot of people's lives. So I was very loved as a child, maybe overly loved. As being the youngest, a lot of people, all of my siblings were very, very excited to have me and were, very, very sweet to me. I know it was never any question whether or not I was really loved or not. So one of the things that, as I am starting to kind of deconstruct and look back at a lot of my life, I realize now that I struggled with anxiety from a very, very young age, but there wasn't words for it. I just cried a lot and didn't want to go places. I remember not wanting to go to my primary classes by myself. I always went with my siblings, and, we just thought that it was shy and whatever, but now recognizing that I struggled with anxiety from a very, very young age. And again, it was just the times we didn't know what anxiety was back then, but that is what it was. So the thing that's probably most significant to touch on quickly, and as my childhood, talking about growing up, is from the ages of about 8 to 12, 3rd to 6th grade of my memories, I was molested and sexually abused by somebody that I should have been able to trust, but I kept it very, very quiet. Nobody knew that it was happening, but it was a very ongoing thing through through those very formative years. I remember being in elementary school and them talking about abuse at an assembly and saying, if there's anybody that's been, that needs to talk to a counselor, and, like my heart beating and going, should I say something? But didn't want to be that kid. Was protecting, the image that we had and that I knew that that it would change dynamics of everything. And so I just kind of kept it quiet until my junior year of high school. So up until that point, I was very, very boy crazy, which makes sense when you are dealing with this, being a sexual abuse, not only victim, but at that point in time, I wouldn't say I was a survivor when you're not talking about it or whatever. So you continue to be a victim until you can actually become a survivor, and there's no way to do that if you're not sharing your story or if anybody knows. So
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
um and so I was very, very boys crazy. There was lots of issues of masturbation that nobody it just created this sense of being a sinner. I mean that from a very, very young age, I remember reading The Friend, and people were, kids would pray for their teddy bear to be found. And I was praying for this awful thing to go away. And so if God's not answering me, it's got to be my fault. I have to be the
Yep.
heathen because this little girl can find her teddy bear and this awful thing that's happening to me can't be taken away. Then it must be me. And then add to that when you are sexually stimulated, it creates a masturbation, which now I understand is a normal part of childhood, but being raised in the
Mm-hmm.
church, it's not. And I
Right.
specifically have a vivid memory of For the Strength of Youth, which is like my biggest nemesis of life. I hate that with everything. But I remember the very first time of them going over it in Young Women's and putting a word to masturbation, and I just felt like I was going to hell. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it just creates this awful narrative that without context, without, anything, I'm a bad person and there's nothing I can do to change it. So might as well go and have lots of boyfriends. So, and I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they were good guys. We didn't ever do anything, that in my mind now that was very tame for how so many teenagers outside of the church even lived. But it still was more than any of my friends or more than, whatever. So fast forward to my junior year when I finally had the opportunity to talk about my abuse to my family, and it was a massive shock. It was my my mom did the best that she knew at the time. She got me into counseling with LDS Social Services. I don't know, given the set of circumstances, that I would have done anything different, but my family dynamics at home were very much, we don't talk about the hard things. And so it was discussed, and please, let's not talk about it again. Go to therapy, figure it out. Let's not talk about it again. The counselor that I had with LDS Social Services was um, she made no effort to connect with me in any type, way, shape, or form, and continued the narrative of the church of just forgive your sinners. And she tried to do a lot of inner child work without having any established relationship, and really, really just re-victimized me, to have to say these things outside to a virtual stranger that made no effort to even connect to this 16-year-old girl, that took a lot of bravery. I guess I was 17 at the time, took a lot of bravery to say anything ever out loud to anybody. And she was the second person to say it to, and no effort was made on that part. So I still continued to meet with her for probably a year. I believe, I don't remember for sure because I just didn't feel anything. It wasn't productive. It wasn't whatever. So we ended up moving. So that was junior year. Senior year was not great. I mean, obviously, I'm going to be in a pretty bad mental state. Um, Immediately after graduating from high school, literally, we lived in a hotel the end of my last 2 weeks of high school. We moved up to the Seattle area. Um, and I was super excited to live up there. I was my sister, my oldest sister lived up there. I was excited to be near my nieces and nephews. I wanted a fresh start. For some reason, well, I understand now that Davis County Bountiful started to feel like it was kind of heavy to me. And so this freedom of going to Seattle. Um, but obviously I was a very broken girl at that point in time. So there was a new singles ward that was set up there, and I was excited to go to the singles ward as an 18-year-old. Like, wow, okay. And was associating with 29, whatever, just a lot of older guys. I did, just as kind of a precursor for what is to come, I did meet my husband in that ward, and he happened to be 6.5 years older than me, which is not as inappropriate, but but he was definitely of the older age, and so I'll always be grateful for that ward because of meeting him. But before I met him, I'm kind of in this dark place, and there was a guy in that ward, a new convert, that was very, very clearly a bad boy. He was very, very not your typical Mormon, and I, I just remember going, "Yep, that'll work. That'll do. That'll get what's on the inside of me out." Right? Like, I was just trying to live this. There's all this turmoil and everything inside of me, and with the good girl image on the outside of doing all these things that seem to be, I'm a good girl. I go to church every Sunday. I'm sweet. I do all of the things, but there's just darkness inside of me. And so, I met this guy. It escalated pretty quickly, and kept, no, I'm not going to have sex. No, I'm not going to have sex. No, I'm not going to have sex. He was sexually experienced and didn't, with being new to the church, it wasn't necessarily like, it was more like, why is this such a bad thing, kind of a thing. And so there was an element of coercion. I don't know. I haven't fully reconciled that, but there was definitely coercion and breaking me down, and it was not a healthy relationship. We were awful for each other. It really, really did not match. But so it was about 4 months later, and I was pregnant. And the irony of it is, I had met my now husband in that 4 month period of time, and the night before I got pregnant, he and I stayed up the entire night talking and connecting, and the next day I got pregnant. That's kind of an ironic thing, but because of that, because I had met him and we had connected, before I even knew I was pregnant, I had broken it off with this guy, and saw that who my husband was more along the lines of who I was and where I should be. And then found out I was pregnant, and obviously the world kind of stopped at that point in time. I pretended to be engaged for about 24 hours to the guy, thinking that would be it. I didn't, it took me a couple of days. My husband was the second person that I told. I told a best friend, and I told him, and then I don't even remember how long it was after, but then I knew I needed to tell my parents. I had moved out with some friends before, a couple of months before, um, but I knew that I wouldn't be able to sustain that, and that I would have to move back home at that point in time. So, um, the part to put on that one is, kind of the caveat on that is, I had already known a couple of friends that had gotten pregnant in high school, and they had placed their baby for adoption. There's For the Strength of Youth, there's all of the lessons on that. Everything out there is marry the person. That's the ideal, situation, is to marry the person. And so I kind of played around with that idea, but we just really were awful together. We were. And I so I knew that would not be the best thing for my child at that point in time, like, no matter what. So anyway, I got up the courage to tell my parents. I believe I had stopped pretending like I was engaged and had broken it off with him at that point, but I don't remember fully at the timeline on that, and it might not be significant. But the day I told my parents was probably one of the worst days of my life. I remember the look on my dad's face. I remember my mom's reaction. the ironic thing, one of my sisters was living with us at the time too, and recently she said, "What do you remember from that night?" And I just, kind of brushed over. I said, "I don't remember much. I remember Dad's face and I remember Mom." And she told me about this whole portion of the night that my brain literally blocked out. Like, she said it and I was like, "What? That actually happened?" And I even laughed and I'm like, "Gosh, our brain's so awesome. It's so incredible what it'll do to protect us." Like, it was that traumatic of an event that I literally, until, 25 years later, did not remember this incident whatsoever. Um, so obviously it was not immediate support. It was incredible disappointment. I knew that I had gone from the good girl to, the worst in my family at that point in time. And all of my siblings had been, I literally was the good girl. Like, we joke as my friends now that I'm still friends with it. The things that we thought were rebellious were like, really? Come on, we could have been worse than that. I was a really, really good kid. And so, to fall from grace it was a really, really hard blow. My siblings were definitely more heathens and more rambunctious than I was. So to be the one, I knew that it was going to devastate my parents, and I wasn't wrong. I wasn't wrong. It did devastate them. And so living with that was hell. That it was awful. So about 2 weeks later, my bishop of my singles ward called me and said that my dad had called him and told him what was going on. Um, Mind you, my dad was not in that ward in any way, shape, or form. He had not said a word to me in between the night that I told them and that experience. Again, knowing my dad's history and how he is, I understand why he did, but part of understanding doesn't absolve the effect that it had on me. And so again, it's not the malice in any way, shape, or form. He was going to where he thought he could get help for something that was extremely difficult for him too. So, but it was a violation of my privacy. It was an absolute violation of my privacy. So I was in the bishop's office, and he was a very, very kind man. I think it would have been even worse on me if he hadn't been the kind of person that he was. And so for that, I feel like I was very lucky on the bishop roulette. Um, that it wasn't worse on me. So we had one meeting, and then I did feel loved by him, but part of that love was that a disciplinary council would need to be done on this. And whew, just a sec.
Can I just clarify before you go on to, at this point, were you 18 at this point?
Yeah. 19.
Yeah.
I had my 19th birthday.
19. So I was just thinking about that being sort of an added layer of, like you were talking about, a violation of your privacy. Yes. To have a grown adult go to another grown adult to talk about
adult things,
something about another adult, like it's,
yeah.
And I completely understand what you're saying when you say your dad had your best interests at heart and thought he was doing the best thing, but that's, like you say, it doesn't take away the sting that you're a grown adult and you had somebody kind of going behind your back talking about your personal affairs with somebody else.
Without even, he literally hadn't talked to me in between those time frames. And so, and that's how he copes. It's how he was learned, but still doesn't change the fact that I needed a relationship with my dad at that moment. And the only way he connected with me was what felt like tattling on me, So,
yeah. So Myndee, before you go on, I just want to let you know that I can relate to your story. I'm not sure that you know.
I listened to your story, Kendra, and there are so many similarities between our two stories. Like, it was, I was glad that I listened to it before I did this. In fact, I was going to text you and I forgot to, that you're going to be surprised how many more, even as we kind of go along. There's a lot of similarities between ours. So thank you.
Definitely. Okay, just want you to know that I'm feeling all of this
Yeah,
while you're
and
talking.
I hope that it's not too triggering
and
for
that
you.
no, actually, it's become very validating, because there, those of us who have gone through this, there is nobody else can really understand that level of betrayal and that level of invalidation for the experiences that we've been through, um, the level of violation towards us when we're trying to tell a story or tell what's happened to us, and we become the victim, or not the victim but the
Right.
villain. We become the one that is in trouble for this thing that really there's no training or understanding within the church for them to be able to further victimize people, which is what they do. They're supposed to be there to be a counselor, but they don't have any counseling training. So instead of instead of extending a hand and saying, I can see that you have been traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
they instead extend a book, The Miracle of Forgiveness, or they extend a trial against you to say, okay, well, you have to prove that this is really what's happening, but really you're the one that's going to have to pay the consequences.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. So it all turns out to be, I'm the bad guy. I'm the bad person. I have to fix me. Where do we even go with that? Except that's all I can do is do what I'm expected to do to fix me.
Well, one of the things,
but is it really
yeah,
me?
listening to your guys' podcast, it was the first time ever that I heard somebody else say that they had a scarlet letter on them, and that was like, to hear. I've said that for years, and to hear that other people have felt that way, that's when it was like, I have to tell this. I have to be another voice for what this is. So,
well, thank you for being willing, because just as you have been able to sort of find that validation in other people, there are so many other people out there that will be validated because you're sharing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Okay, so the disciplinary council. Let's talk about that. The bishopric was very sweet. Again, they were three very, very kind men. I don't remember who the executive secretary was, or that would have been in there, but I do remember that it was a contemporary of mine. That that it wasn't an older man that was called into the ward. It was another single adult. And that's the only part that I remember. The other part of it is sitting in the hallway waiting to go into it. The father of the baby came in for his disciplinary council, and we sat out there together being shamed about this. And my heart hurts for how hard this had to have been for him, because he hadn't even been a member. Maybe it was a year at that point in time. And obviously, he left and never came back. It's not a surprise. I don't blame him in any way, shape, or form. But, so there we are, two young kids. I was 19, he was 18, sitting there, like out of the principal's office, is what it felt like. And I don't remember who went first between the two of us, but anyway, so I go in there, and it starts out as, this is out of love. This is for, we want redemption. Heavenly Father loves you, blah, 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 right? Now tell us what happened. And at some point, they asked me about sexual abuse. I'd only told about 3 people in my life about that. And so to have to sit there, to this this power differential, right? Like, I'm a young woman with 4 men in suits. Like, the power differential of that is, oh my gosh, it just is sickening to me now. And I'm an extremely honest person, almost to a fault. Like, you're going to know everything that's in me. So if they're going to ask me a question, I'm going to answer it. Like, I don't have any option to. I listen to other people's stories, and they always say how they lied to bishops, and I'm like, I'm so jealous. I wish I could have lied to bishops. It's just not in me. So they asked me about sexual abuse, and I had to tell this this wall of suits, yes, that happened, when I had no support about that whatsoever. And And that was probably one of the hardest moments. On top of that, too, add to that, the next question was masturbation. I mean, what else was I going to say, right? I only tell the truth. And I had never told anybody about that, ever, ever, ever. And then how many times did we have sex? What kinds of things did we do when we had sex? I mean, I don't remember all of it, but I just left defeated. I felt I had committed the sin next to murder. I mean, literally, that's what I was raised to believe. That was the rhetoric that was heard. The sin next to murder. This sweet girl who never wanted to do anything wrong, ever. Like, I was somebody that walked the line of just trying to be the good girl. And I committed the sin next to murder. And the weight of that is too much for somebody. I mean, it really, really is. Whew,
Myndee, I just want to say, you said some words just now about the sin next to murder. You said that was the rhetoric you heard growing up. And I want to validate for you that that's not just rhetoric. That's written in writing in the Miracle of Forgiveness.
Yep.
I've heard people kind of out there trying to dismiss that verbiage, saying, well, not everybody believes that, or that's culture or whatnot. It's not. It's written in the Miracle of Forgiveness, and that's the book that's handed out to anybody that commits a quote unquote sin. I have air quotes around that. So I just want to validate that this is not just words being thrown around. Like, this is actual. They believed this wholeheartedly. They still do.
It's still there.
And I actually, I have a thought. Just, I'm wondering how many women were given the Miracle of Forgiveness versus men.
That's interesting.
I'm seeing that there's, you talk about power differential. I also think that men sympathize with men. And because men are in control, men have the authority and the power, are they really going to have boys and men read the Miracle of Forgiveness? Or are they giving that to women specifically? And it kind of makes me go back to the whole idea of Eve,
right,
being the one that chose to partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Are women the only ones being given this book, or were women the only ones being given this book? Because from what I understand, they're not actually giving it out anymore.
It's actually out of print now. Like, they finally, I think they bowed to social pressure, and it's out of print now. But it's a good point you bring up, Kendra, because I hear story after story after story of couples who have, gotten into this situation, and she's given a full disciplinary counsel, disfellowshipped, excommunicated, fill in the blank. And he's gotten a slap on the wrist and said, oh, boys will be boys. Go your way. Don't do it again. It's just that it's a very, very much a double standard.
I think what added to that with mine too is that he was a new convert, right? And I should have known better. I should have been the one to be the gatekeeper of him at that point in time. And I was a terrible influence on him, and I knew better. And I remember it. I mean, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I'll come back. But I remember at some point, I actually even wrote him a letter of telling him how sorry I was that I ruined the church for him. And please come back. Don't let my bad influence tell you, that this is what the church is and what have you. And it was, that was the level of guilt I felt because of who I was versus who he was. So I have no idea if he got the Miracle of Forgiveness. I would imagine he would have trashed it if he did. But I mean, I definitely know that was the advice that was given. I think I didn't read it though. I think that I knew enough of the messages in it. I don't have any memory of reading the book at all. But you know what? It's been proven that I can block things out really, really well. So who knows? Maybe I did.
Right. Well, if I didn't have proof that I read it with notes in the margins and with the actual letter that I received when I was disfellowshipped, if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't think that I had read it either, because the entire book, Christina can attest to this when she was trying to read it for her Instagram page and kind of posting some things about it, that you can only take so much before you have to put it down, because with the trauma that we've endured as, you know, sexual assault survivors, when you read something like that, you have to dissociate from it because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't resonate with your soul. It doesn't resonate with who you are. And honestly, like what you were saying about feeling responsible for this boy, women are told from the time that we are young that we are responsible for the thoughts of men and boys, that we are responsible for the eternal salvation of not only ourselves, but of our family members. We are taught that this burden belongs to us. And I think it permeates all aspects of our lives, where we think that we're responsible for other people when we are not. We are only responsible for ourselves. Even with little kids, like, we can be responsible for them as our own children up to a certain point, but there's a difference between responsibility and total control.
Right.
You know, I have no control over what my children decide to do.
Right.
Right? Maybe when they're really little, I have control because I'm holding their hand and I'm dragging them along everywhere that they go. But when they become independent of me, that they're going to school and they're at school by themselves, when they're teenagers and they start driving, I have no control except for the influence that I've had over them. The church permeates so deeply into our psyche and into our soul that we are controlled and influenced by the church, by what we've been taught from when we were very little. So I just want to acknowledge that for you, that you are not alone in that thought, that you're not the only one that was taught those things, and that that's absolutely a normal thing to think and to feel at that time in your life, because a lot of us have that same feeling.
Thank you for that. I agree. I mean, that's you know, I had two brothers growing up, and I was their gatekeeper. You know, all of us, 4 girls and 2 boys, the girls were the gatekeepers. Don't wear those shorts. Don't, you know, the modesty stuff, and, you know, what have you. I was absolutely the gatekeepers of when I was dating boys and doing things, you know, that were quote unquote wrong. I changed my mind on that now. But, you know, I was their gatekeeper. I was the bad influence on them. You know, I mean, just all playing into this, that I'm a bad person. You know, not only was I doing bad things, but I was the one that should have known better, you know. And it's one of the reasons why one of the many reasons why For the Strength of Youth is just one of the most damaging things that there is, because the level of perfection, with no room for being a human, being a teenager, being all of these things that we all naturally are. But you read that and you're like, I'm a shit person. Why should I even try? Why should I even try? Yeah.
Exactly. You said the word gatekeeper, and I think that's really interesting, not just for our family members, but I kind of have this idea of Mormonism at this point, where we are, even if we don't want to be, even if we don't think we're a judgmental person, we become very judgmental because we are gatekeepers for each other. It wasn't just your dad, that him going to the bishop, that's what he thought was the right thing to do. That's what every person that is indoctrinated into the church thinks, that they have the responsibility to tattle on each other and hold each other accountable for things that are the Strength of Youth level of expectation and control. So if they see you doing something, there are people that will go to their bishop and tattle on you for something you did at work, or they saw you doing when you were driving, or saw you doing when you were at home, or heard something that you said. It's such a level of a violation of privacy and on all levels. And as a family member, your dad felt like he was responsible for your eternal salvation. And what does he have to do to help you with that? What does he have to do with that responsibility but to go to your bishop and have him hold you
Right,
accountable?
right. Spot on. I mean,
You know?
that's exactly that. That's why I don't hold any malice or, even responsibility.
Right.
I mean, what else would he have done?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally, what else would he have done? He
Yeah.
didn't know any better.
Well,
He didn't know
yeah.
how to cope. And, I mean, I,
Mm-hmm.
as much of it was a violation of me, it's almost a violation of him too. To that it took away
Yeah.
his will on
Yeah.
how to handle this. And he, and that's one of the hardest things looking back now on all of this is every time I went to the church for peace and help and answers and all of that, it was exactly that there was, I mean, bishops are, it's one of the worst jobs in the world, that you have to sit there and listen to everybody's stuff, and you're just, I mean, you're a plumber. I mean, you don't have, and you're, I mean, knowing who those men were on my council, I know they hated asking those questions. I know that they were in the worst position possible because they don't want to know these things about me. They really, really don't. And they think they're doing it out of love because what else do you know? And that's why it's such a screwed up system. That's part of it, is it's it's awful for everybody involved. There's nobody that comes out of them thinking, oh gosh, that was, I mean, you do come out of it they thinking, I've done the best that I can. And it's a moral obligation to help and be the gatekeepers for others. It's not even a responsibility, but it's an obligation. When you know better, you do better.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or I mean, too much who is given, much is required. Right? So
Yeah. I think what you were saying though, I think that there are some, so I'm going to use the words that my mom used to say.
Yes.
There are those who are called to teach, and there are those who are called to test.
Yeah, I heard that.
Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Have you heard that? Okay. Because there's a lot of people that I've talked to that haven't heard that. And what I think about that is that there are men who are in these councils who, if they're asking those questions that are very detailed questions and wanting to know the details of your sexual activity, is that something that's actually part of the disciplinary council, or is that something that single individual person wanted to ask? Like, why are disciplinary councils that I've heard of many, many disciplinary councils that they have gone and had detailed questions asked. That has to have been something that was written into the expectation. Otherwise, why would it be the pattern? Why would that be a pattern that is all over the church? So it's either that, or there are people that are called to test. There are people that are called to test that are all permeating the church, who all want to know those details for their own sexual gratification. So there are those who are called to teach, the plumber that wants to just do the best job that they can, to much is given, much is required, right? And then there's those other people who get off on your trauma and who get off on your sexual experiences. So how do you know which one is which? And how do you know which ones are actually called of God? How do you know which ones have the discernment to know when to ask those questions and when not to? When is it appropriate to ask those questions and when is it not to? That's why the whole thing about disciplinary councils just feels gross, because there is no expectation about what they are supposed to look like. Like, people just get to go off the rails and do whatever they want to do and ask the questions they want to ask. So where's the guidelines, and how do they keep people who are running these disciplinary councils in line with whatever they believe their guidelines should be.
And saying that, like that, I've heard a few of those too, of, the awful experiences. That's where I'm like, wow, I actually did have there was a silver lining in that I did have a man that I know that he was uncomfortable asking those questions, and he, that it wasn't the violation that I felt after it, and the re-victimization, was because of the system, not because of the men that were part of it. Lucky for me, very lucky for me, because that's not the case for others. And I mean, I can't even
Right.
imagine what that would have been like if I had even felt like there was any sexual gratification based on what the things that I had to reveal. I mean, I can't even imagine the re-victimization that could be so much worse than mine. And I'm going to try really hard not to say worse and, whatever, because they all are, it's all bad. It's
Yeah.
all bad.
Yeah.
And it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just a really, really broken system of violation.
It is. It is. If those questions were not required to be asked, if those questions were not part of the script, so to speak, then you were re-victimized.
True. That's true. And since there is no, I mean,
know,
I don't know of any that it's like, I mean, it does say details of the events, is part of what they're supposed to come to, but that is at the discretion of whoever's in there. And it's not in what they've been trained from the state president, who was trained by who, right? Like, it's just, there's no protocols for it necessarily. I mean, when you're looking at a therapeutic, no,
there's
I
no
mean,
oversight either.
Bishop decides,
Right.
and then it gets tossed to the upper levels, and you get the mark on your whatever, and it's all because of one guy who said, yep, this is where we're at. But I mean, supposedly it's anybody that's in that room, but we all know how that works. I mean, it's comes down to one guy that
right.
can be a very, very messed up person. And I mean, yeah, and when therapeutic practices and how it should be, there's the situation is just atrocious when you know how, from a good mental health perspective, how something like that should be handled is, I mean, it's just atrocious for what it is. And the fact that they still go on today, right? That and that's my biggest thing with the church at this point in time, is some of this stuff, I mean, not disciplinary councils, but where I'm about to go, with the adoption stuff and whatever, some of it is indicative of the times, right? Like that's how society was as a whole. I mean, not as a whole, but where the trend of society was. And
that's where we believed society was, right? That's where we believed as Mormons in the church, right? Yeah.
There's other high demand religions that were very similar to this, but where the problem comes in is this: there's zero accountability that there was victims that were harmed through these. And even if they came out now and said, you know what, like, a lot of people were really harmed by this, we're sorry about that, like, that would be enough, right? That would be enough to just say, this happened, and you guys, I'm really sorry, the ones that you were hurt. And then that's fine, because it is there was a time difference from now. I mean, adoptions in the 1990s when I were way better than the adoptions in the 1960s. I mean, that there had been progress, and now it's, I assume it's a lot better process. I don't know. I don't, go through it a whole lot at this point, but.
I want to go back to what I said about, if you were asked those questions and those questions were not part of the script, that you were re-victimized. Honestly, the fact that you went through it to begin with, had to go through a disciplinary council to begin with, that all was re-victimization. You having to rehash things to three men in a room where the power differential is so great is re-victimization. So you were re-victimized on multiple levels.
Not just that there was a power struggle, but like that you're having to rehash these experiences in an environment of people who have no training, no education, and are not doing it in a trauma-informed manner. That is inflicting harm.
Like today, in a much more trauma-informed world, is why don't we have a therapist at the very least for every stake that can come in and be part of those disciplinary councils? I mean, why couldn't I mean, I wouldn't have, but why couldn't I call my Relief Society president and have her sit next to me while I was in this disciplinary council?
Well, I can tell you, this is my opinion only, why they can't have a therapist there. Are you familiar with Natasha Helfer Parker? Or I guess she's just Natasha Helfer now. Part of the reason she was excommunicated is because she could no longer reconcile what she knew to be true as a therapist with what she had to say and do as a member of the church. She could know. So I think it's impossible for them to have a therapist there during these disciplinary councils, because a therapist would have to say,
mm-hmm.
this is a
Mm-hmm.
normal part of life. This is a normal part of development. And they can't say that because it goes
Mm-hmm.
against church teachings. So they're put between a rock and a hard place. And if I'm being like forthcoming, I'm a registered nurse. I can look back on my whole career and see places in my career where I was absolutely torn between what I knew to be true as a educated healthcare person and what I'd been
Mm-hmm.
taught was true as a member of the church. And it puts you in an uncomfortable place. I just don't think that they could ever have a therapist in there unless it was a therapist who wasn't practicing ethically and who would go along with
Mm-hmm.
their church rhetoric, which is also why when the church agrees to pay for counseling for you, you have,
Mm-hmm.
not you, but the collective you have to go to somebody from their approved list. It has to be an LDS therapist, an LDS counselor, because they don't want you getting messages out there that sex is normal or masturbation is normal. They can't run that risk. It's so convoluted, and I don't think it can never be trauma informed. It can never be therapeutic, because in order to do so, you have to tell the truth, which is that their rules
You're
don't make any
spot on,
sense.
100% spot on. Is they're too incompatible to be able to have somebody who's trauma informed be in a traumatic situation that continues to be traumatic. So I think you're really, really spot on with that. So it wasn't till years later, maybe 5 years ago, that I realized how traumatic that event actually was. It took a really long time because it was out of love, right? It was out of love, and they were kind men, and so therefore it was should have been a positive experience, quote unquote. So what came from it is that I was disfellowshipped. Of course, that would be the normal thing, and again, kind of lucky that I was in a singles ward, because the sacrament thing wasn't as big of a deal because there was lots of people not taking the sacrament in the singles ward. So I know that could be a lot harder for other people, right? I see you shaking your head, Kendra, and it's like, why is everybody not taking the sacrament on Sundays? In a singles ward.
I started laughing while you were while you were talking about multiple people in the singles ward not taking the sacrament, because if we were talking about the Scarlet Letter, do you use the whole alphabet? Am I Scarlet Letter A and you're Scarlet Letter B? Here's Scarlet Letter C.
C's for cigarettes, and you can smell that one.
Right? And if I'm Scarlet Letter Z, then what's the next one? Is it double A or double Z?
Right.
Is it
right.
ZA?
No, that's awesome. That's totally awesome.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So it was great that it was, that the sacrament thing wasn't as big of a deal, but it was to me. It was huge to me. And then you add to that my belly started growing. And so I literally had physical evidence of my Scarlet Letter. So once I went, once I told my parents, once I came to resolution, the confirmation bias, now that I know what the word of that is for adoption, is so, oh my gosh, this is just a new epiphany to me, more or less, is the confirmation bias, because it was what you do, right? So I all I ever wanted to be in my life was a mom. Like, I never really had career aspirations, or, I remember in young elementary school, what do you want to be when you grow up? A mom, and so for me, being pregnant and being faced with this decision was, it was brutal. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to have the words to describe it fully, but it was an awful, awful position to be in. Not And so I played around with the idea of keeping her, and I knew she was a girl from the beginning. I really did know she was a girl, and I played around with keeping her, and I had the best that my parents and family around me of their support. Right, it was pseudo support, because we all knew that if I kept her, it was against the church doctrine. And nobody wanted me to marry him. And so that really was my only choice. But let's give it to you as your choice, right? And there's no choice. There's no choice in this situation. While I was pregnant, I think now I read that it was an Ensign article that came out. It was right as I was, oh gosh, it doesn't even matter when it was. It was while I was pregnant, and I sent it to you guys, and it's called Advice for Unwed Mothers or something like that. And the language in it, the words that are in it are verbatim to what I heard. I mean, verbatim from my bishop who loved me, from my family who loved me, from everybody that was around me that loved me and wanted what was best for me, was reading these offensive, vile words. I don't know if you guys want to chime in about your reaction to those.
I do. I'm glad you said that, because a minute ago you said, I don't know if I have the words to describe how awful and how vile this was. You did. You sent this article to the two of us. And I was up visiting Kendra at the time. So we sat down and kind of were looking at it at the same time. And as I started reading it, I started experiencing something in my body that I wasn't even aware was connected to what I was reading. I just was not feeling good about it. And I looked over at Kendra, and something had happened to her. Like her whole face had just changed. And I started to mention something, and she kind of just looked at me and said, I had to put that down. Like, I couldn't keep reading it. And I went back to reading it. And about a paragraph later, I said the same thing. I was like, this is the most vile, evil thing I've read in a long time. The energy of it, I would put right there with the miracle of forgiveness, which is dark, evil, damaging. Even as so just for the record, I never went back and finished it. Like, it's an evil. So man, it makes me tearful. Sorry. I just want to validate that if that article could make me feel that way, and I wasn't even in that position, I cannot fathom the feelings that you felt going through this experience. I cannot even imagine it. I just want you to know that I acknowledge that.
Thank you very much. That validation is everything. I didn't find that article until, oh gosh, it was just in the last several months. And it's awful. It is awful. So thank you for that validation. It's words that, I mean, talk about the message of the sin next to murder. I mean, it literally says that in there. It talks about having no morals. It talks about, that my child's illegitimate. And I promise she was legitimate. She was legitimate.
What does that mean, to call a child illegitimate? Like, my mother heart doesn't even, I can't comprehend that.
I don't know.
What does that even mean?
Well, it's like calling a child a bastard, right? What is the point of that except to put a scarlet letter on the child? What's the point of that?
Right. You talk about generational trauma. Right. Talk about generational trauma. That's what she was experiencing in my womb. I mean, that when I started being trauma informed on generational trauma, it was awful to me, because I understood so much better what she experienced in utero. Not even, to it just impacted her entire DNA, and to call her illegitimate.
Are you familiar with epigenetics?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just tapping into it right now, and it is holy cow. And it's part of why I can have so much grace towards my family.
Sure.
I understand that they're victims of a lot of things too.
Absolutely.
And, my dad was born in England in the 40s. And so talk about untrauma informed, society and, what have you. And so my dad is from England, and my mom is from Pioneer stock. And the pressure of that and the generational trauma that comes with that, I mean, that's all there. And so to think that now understanding epigenetics and generational trauma, my poor daughter, this is what, from the time, I mean, it's an evil thing for her to have to bear for the rest of her life. And, and it's no fault of mine, no fault of my ancestors, but it's, the church has accountability towards this. The church is culpable for those awful words being out there, and the manipulation and the coercion in that article were just sickening, absolutely sickening. Things like, they made claims in there that all, not some, not most, not majority, all children placed through LDS Social Services eventually go on to be sealed in the temple. All. And there's no, what's the qualifier on that? My daughter, I mean, we'll get to there, but she wasn't. And so what's the qualifier? How, I mean, that's outright lies. Outright lies. And the statistics that they found were just sickening, that I was now part of the moral decline of the country. I mean, those words are just sickening. And that's what my message was. And so to say I had a choice is just bullshit. Right. There was literally no choice, because redemption was, for the Scarlet Letter, was to place her for adoption. That's it.
Yeah.
And through LDS Social Services, of course. I mean, that's where you get the ultimate. And so I about 5 months was when 4 months is, I think, when I contacted them. I think I had said the words out loud by 5 months that I was going to place her. The process of placing, and again, some of this is times, and accountability from the church is the thing that I would want the most. There was such things as open adoptions during that time period, but they were messy, and I can't speak to how they are now, simply because I don't know very much about it, but I am in some birth mom Facebook groups, and adoption is traumatizing regardless of the circumstances surrounding it. But once I had finally made the decision, I sat down with the counselor or the social worker from LDS Social Services. I lived about an hour away from the local one, because I was in Seattle, and I was in north of Seattle and they were in south of Seattle. And so once a month, she actually came up to my stake center. And so I didn't have a lot of the experiences that a lot of girls do, of going and having group classes, and the peer pressure that existed with it. My counselor was very, very kind. She recognized that I was a much more mature unwed mother, being 19, almost 20, because, and so she ended up kind of not breaking rules, but maybe breaking rules, doing a couple of things for me that weren't done for other girls. But so we sat down, and she wanted to talk to me about the things that were most important to me and whatever. And when I think back on it, it's just asinine what was important to me at the time. Literally, it was the church, animals, and music. And her father was tall, and so I wanted a family that was tall. We got a profile. I should have sent you guys the profile so that you could see that too. We got what their height, what their weight was, what their hair color was, what their eye color was, their professions, their hobbies, and then a letter that I would bet that 90% of them were cut and paste. I mean, it was basically just verbiage in this letter that they wrote to me. And so I was given that for 3 families. And again, confirmation bias that comes out of this one is just incredible. The experience that went along with that. So I said animals were up there, and animals have always been an extremely important part of my life in a therapeutic fashion that I didn't realize until later in years, that they were always a place of peace for me. And same with, I played the piano, and it's where I felt everything is, sitting at the piano. And so those, they were important because personally to me, they gave me solace, but there was no direction on anything else, right? Like, I'm choosing a family because they like animals and they like music and they're tall. Like, that's just, I mean, it's crazy with that. So the letter didn't say anything about the church or their testimonies or anything like that. And because that was a high one, I asked if I could get a letter about, that from the parents. And that was one of the rules that she kind of broke with me, is to actually have communication through her before choosing the family. I mean, that's crazy that this was breaking a rule. So they did write me a letter. Each of them did. And it was, again, it's just kind of fluff, I mean, it's what they know, what they want me to hear. And it's just crazy that that's what my choices were based on, is just these letters. So they contacted the father, and he said he wasn't going to sign his rights away, that he and his girlfriend were going to raise the baby. And I thought that was, yeah. And he said she never wanted to be a mom anyway. And it just was crazy. And so that weekend, my family had a fast, and, for me, for the situation. And by Monday, he called me and said that he would sign the papers. That was confirmation bias that the fast worked, right? Because he called me. Never mind the tactics. I don't know if that's the right word. That the social worker used with him, saying that I was going to fight him in court, and that I had my whole family to support me, and he didn't have anything. I mean, that she was very, very forceful with him. And so never mind that happened, but it was the fast. That was the reason why he changed his mind. And so by the middle of that week, I think that we had his papers signed. I was 5 months pregnant, and the crazy ironic thing, my husband and I were on and off dating during this while I was pregnant, and he actually is the witness on the biological father's adoption papers. So my husband literally was by my side the entire time. He, I don't, he's amazing. My husband's amazing, and I'll get very emotional talking about him because he really is. So part of that weekend of the fast was, I remember thinking that it was just so clear of which family I was going to choose, because of feeling like he was taking away their child from them. And that is what I clung to for my whole life, the whole time of growing up, or I mean, the whole time post adoption, was that I had this feeling that he was taking their child away from them. I now understand, again, confirmation bias, and that the things that stood out to me on that paper were that they liked horses and that they liked music. And those were the things that were therapeutic for me. And they were tall, and I wanted her to be in a family that she would feel like she looked like them. And so the confirmation bias on that was just crazy. And to have it, to have it be because of inspiration was just, it's so manipulative. It's so manipulative. So we got his paper signed. My husband and I, part of the story is that we were on and off dating still. He was my very, very best friend. Come to birth and delivery. My sister, my oldest sister, was my birth coach and was probably one of the most supportive things that I had at that time. She and my mom were in the delivery room with me. And for reference, I had both of my subsequent children natural birth, because that's how I am. With her, I wanted an epidural because I didn't want to feel or experience anything at all. Whew. This is hard, you guys.
It is hard. It is hard. It is so hard.
My daughter is the most beautiful soul, and it's so hard to know that this is what she lived through.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah. What were you, when you were saying that you felt like he was taking his child away from him? I think I missed something there.
Okay. Yeah. What it was when I my sweet dog is here to give me her emotional support. She sees me crying. She's
my
amazing.
my dog is here to give me emotional support too.
Yeah, I've trained her as my emotional support dog, and as soon as I start crying, she's right here by me. She's freaking
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that portion of it is what it felt like was, so he said he wasn't going to sign the papers, and my first thought was the father, he being the father, was taking the adoptive family's child away from them.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because I was simply a vessel in bringing this child into the world. I couldn't think of her as my own. She was somebody else's child, because I wasn't worthy of her. I didn't have a temple marriage. I wasn't married.
Well, I actually had some thoughts around that occurred to me as you were talking, and it really just hit me really hard. Yeah, it's making me emotional too. I had this kind of massive realization a few minutes ago that there's this entity, LDS Social Services, that helps parents adopt babies. But in order to do that, they have to have a pool of babies, don't they?
Yeah.
So they are counting on these unwed pregnancies, these babies conceived in sin. And for listeners, I've got air quotes around that because I don't believe that, but they're feeding off of a group of people that they're then vilifying. They're telling you you're a sinner and putting you through this disciplinary council and taking away your privileges and telling you that you're not right with God, all while at the same time, let's provide these families with babies. And I don't know, this juxtaposition between these two things, I don't think I'd ever really seen it that way. And it just hit me really hard a few minutes ago that they're feeding off of and preying off of these quote unquote sinful situations. And it's another layer. It just feels ugly and bad and wrong and evil.
It's a conflict of interest.
Yeah,
it's a conflict of
it
interest.
really is. It really is.
Yes.
Well, and one of the things that was really hard for me to reconcile was the church rhetoric is all of this was meant to be, right? There's got to be a reason for what it was. Added with the guilt of that I'm a sinner, but my daughter was meant to go to this family. So how else would she have gotten to that family if it wasn't for me sinning, right? So you have the Eve complex again.
I was going to say it's Eve all over again. It's bad, evil, 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 but also, well, it had to happen. Otherwise, we couldn't get to where we are. It's so convoluted and damaging.
Well, and then so you've got the Eve complex on that, but then I also really, really always identified with the Mother Mary, right? With Jesus's mom, because she was carrying a child that wasn't her own.
Right.
And my daughter's birthday is in December. And so it was, the birth of Christ and whatever. And so I always identified with her. And it's never occurred to me until the deconstruction from my church of how awful her story is, right? I mean, her story is awful, but I connected to it on a deity level, right? And part of this and part of the verbiage of that awful letter that was, or article that was written of the advice is that I literally just was not worthy of her. I was not worthy of my child. And by keeping her would have been damning her. And the truth of it is I don't think my family could have been capable of loving her the same way they would have loved children, well, all of my other nieces and nephews. And I knew that that would be part of it too. And not to any fault of their own, because
Right.
she would carry my scarlet letter in my family, and
Right.
would always be that one that was conceived out of wedlock, and she was his daughter, and we all hated him, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff. And so I knew even that would play into it. And so part of it is true that my life wasn't better for her than what this family appeared
Mm-hmm.
to be, right?
Appeared. Yeah.
And then part of that too is that I at this point knew that I was going to be marrying my husband. I mean, unless he didn't get he didn't get his butt in gear, then I wasn't going to. But
Yeah.
I mean, we both did know at the time. And I also identified with Abraham because I was being asked to have an Abrahamic sacrifice. And so I
Mm.
held on to the notion that he was going to propose to me at any point in time. And part of the thing that's in that article is that the best, let's see if I can word this right. The best interest of the child, most success is seen when the parents marry before the child is born, I believe is what it was. If you marry after the child is born, then the chances of success are less. So,
Wow.
right? Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got. Just wow.
Right. So the pressure to get married was on both of us.
Mm-hmm.
I assume my husband read that letter. I don't, or that article. I for sure talked to him about it because he was my best friend. And now talking about it later is he did feel that pressure to marry me, but he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready.
Yeah.
And I mean, we didn't get married for 2.5 years later. He clearly wasn't ready. um, and so to have felt the guilt of, for him to have felt that guilt of not being ready is wrong too. I mean, it's
Yeah.
absolutely wrong on that level too. So it's just so damaging to put it all out in words. It's just
So
so screwed
damaging.
up. It's so screwed up. And then you have on the other side of it the people that can't have children, and the church is going to help them with these poor unwed mothers, the teenagers who just don't know better, and
Mm-hmm.
these weak little people. And now look, God is going to give you this
Yeah.
child because you
We're
live
gonna
this
take advantage of
honorable
them.
life.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And I will tell you, and Kendra, you can attest to this too, is being a young, pregnant girl is probably one of the most vulnerable places to be in. And
Absolutely.
you're in a position to make a decision, a choice, not only for you, but for your child, that is unfathomable unless you have been through that experience. And
Mm-hmm.
not going into Roe v. Wade and abortion and all of that, but as a woman who has gone through it, and Kendra, you can agree or disagree with me, that is the very worst time for anybody to get involved in those decisions besides the
Yep.
person themselves. It is
Yep.
absolutely insane to me that other people want to influence that time, be it the church,
Yeah.
be it any religion, any person, any law, anything. It is such a
Mm-hmm.
difficult, vulnerable time to be in.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
My situation was a little different. I don't want to take a lot of time telling my situation, but I'm listening to your story and feeling really grateful um, that my family. I think my family was part of the reason that I ended up keeping my son was because my my parents had given me the choice. My dad was not an active member of the church, and so he actually brought up the idea of abortion. He just said to me, he's like, if that's something that you want to do, I'll
well,
stand by you.
well,
And I don't know that my mom was on that same level. My dad took me into his office and he said that to me, and at that time it didn't feel like the right thing for me. But I think that the I think my experience with social services was was a little different because I think they knew that I had my parents' support in whatever my decision was.
mm,
Um, I didn't I had no plans on marrying the person that that got me pregnant. I had no plans on that. But I think that when I went to church social services, the counselor could see that my intention was not necessarily one way or the other to give him up for adoption versus keeping him. And when I went to counseling, I was remembering from what after with what you were saying, I was remembering that they invited the father, the sperm donor, to show up at counseling, and I'm sitting here thinking, did he ever show up? I don't think he did. I don't think he did, but I'm like, I'm conflicted. I can't remember. There's things that you block
Mm-hmm.
out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even though I don't think he showed up, the counselor basically said to me, "You're not planning on giving this baby up." And I'm like,
So they knew
"Wow,
they
thank you
didn't
for."
have the power with you.
Well, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
When he said that, I had not made that decision. I had not made that decision outwardly.
Interesting.
But then after, if I'm remembering right, after that conversation, I don't remember seeing the counselor again at church
Wow, they
social
just dropped you.
services. They cut me off.
Wow.
I think part of it was because I had been on Accutane when I was pregnant. So they didn't know what the outcome was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
My son's perfect, by the way. He's amazing.
Fabulous.
But there were things that I think would discourage them from adopting out my son because of things that like health conditions and things. He was a high risk pregnancy, that kind of thing. But I was 18 when I was pregnant. Also, I had him when I was 19.
Yeah.
And but it's interesting how they will hold you. They will put their hooks into you and hold on to you if they know that they can have that baby to give it to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
if
this
they have any inkling,
and under the guise that it's an inspired program, and
right.
that there's the spirit of discernment, and the inspiration that goes behind it, all of that is, it just lends itself to that much more, that it's like, well, why wouldn't you go through this beautiful process that God created for you? And the bonus is you get to live your life afterwards, right? I mean, and that was the thing that was told to me over and over, is I had a better chance at a life. And I can tell you, the guilt of that, oh my gosh, living with the guilt of feeling like I even had a tiny bit of reason of giving her up selfishly so I could have a better life just weighed on me my whole life. That's because it was, no part of that was true, but the church told me it was. And I did move on. And so, I did. Yeah.
But did you really move on? Right? I mean, you moved on the best way that you could.
Yeah.
I think both sides of this, like, I kept my son, you gave up your daughter for adoption because it's coercion,
Yeah.
It's coercion either way. But by keeping my son, I still had a scarlet letter. Yeah. By giving up your daughter, you still had a scarlet letter.
If anything, my scarlet letter got hidden. Yours was carried on the front of your chest the rest of your life. I could bury mine at least, and that was motivation too. I didn't want to be a scar on my family of being the one with the unwed, the illegitimate child,
right. But that's just listening to that. That's not about you. That's about them. Yeah. That's about them having this issue with having an unwed mother as a daughter. That's them having the issue of you being a scarlet letter to the family. If it was really about them, then sorry, I'm going to just say this, but fuck them. And I'm not saying that specifically about your family. I'm just saying that if they can't accept you as you are for all of the warts that you have, all of the mistakes that you've made, then why would you want to continue living within a family system that and in a culture that's going to make you feel less than and feel unworthy for all the things that you've done in your life? It's like, it's kind of like this conversation we had the other day about a narcissistic organization or a narcissistic parent who makes a list of all of your faults.
Yep.
and then holds them over your head for the rest of your life.
Yep.
You know, these are all the ways that you have harmed our family, that you've destroyed our family, that you've hurt me. You know,
Well,
how can you get over that?
Right. And I mean, and why you stay is because of indoctrination, because they're in there too, and it's all for love. Like, it's not, you don't stay in those kinds of relationships because they're healthy. You stay in those kinds of relationships because you don't know better,
and because of fear. It's all out of fear.
Yeah, for sure. And the hard part with me, with not having placed her, is that, or having placed her, and my scarlet letter, is having that buried as a secret. I mean, it's just a toll. Who do you tell? When people ask you, how many children do you have? How do you answer? I mean, shouldn't that be an easy question? It was never, it still isn't an easy question. It still is a difficult question to answer, because in my mind, I'm like, well, how well do I want to know you? You know, is this a casual relationship, or are we going to have more conversations where it gets kind of complicated? So, so she was born. Beautiful, beautiful baby girl. My favorite thing is she had a birthmark on her face, and I've got a huge birthmark on my leg. Well, not huge, but a good sized birthmark on my leg, and both of them, you know, fairly red. I actually have a birthmark on my forehead that faded from when I was a child too. And so when she was born with it, I just almost felt like it was a stamp on her, you know, that it was me putting my stamp on her, and she was my child. And this is going to be hard. My experience in the hospital, one of the rules that was broken, I quote unquote rules, is that I got to actually stay in the hospital with her for 3 days, from the time of birth until 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 pickup time, whatever, you know. It's a 72-hour time frame, and our insurance paid for it. And so, because if I checked out of the hospital, they would have taken possession of her. But we were able to work it out so that I could stay in the hospital the whole 72 hours. My husband was the first phone call I made. My now husband, he was there by my side every waking hour he could be. Go to work, come bring me food, stay with me, was there by my side. The spiritual experience that happened while I was there between her and I is what's very, very hard to describe. It felt like a soul to soul conversations that we were having together. I knew her soul. I knew she knew me. I told her to come find me. She agreed she would. It was a baby and a mother, but it was two souls. And as beautiful as that time frame was, it was excruciating. All through that, while my husband was by my side, I was just begging Heavenly Father to inspire him to propose to me, so I didn't have to go through with it. I would have done anything to not have to have gone through with it. But I also knew she understood. That was part of our conversations, is I knew she understood. What had been established to me is that she was always going to know that she was adopted, that I would be part of the conversation so she didn't feel like she wasn't loved. And so I in my mind, I thought I was just sending her off to a really long daycare, is how I told it to myself. She was a very, very peaceful baby. And I walked her out to the curb where a car was sitting, a black SUV was sitting. At the time, you could still put the car seat in the front seat. And there was a car seat there for her. And the whole time we were there, she was just screaming. And she'd hardly even cried the whole time we were in the hospital. And she was just screaming. And I buckled her in. I'd made a quilt for her. Picked out now this atrocious outfit, but it was so cute at the time. And buckled her in and watched my social worker drive away with her. Another part of a rule that was broken is we had made arrangements for me to meet the adoptive mom that night, and that was kind of not done at the time. I kind of want to go back just a minute. This will help me gain my bearings again.
Take your time. It's okay.
Oh, okay. So one of the things I kind of wanted to go back and talk about was the circumstances of this adoptive family. I think it's really, well, I don't think it is. It's extremely important in the story. So I lived in Washington State, and the way that it was then, and I don't know how it is now or whatever, but they were Washington State residents too, and social services didn't usually connect interstate. Like if you were in Washington State, then you placed in Washington State, and there wasn't crossover on that, is what my understanding and experience was with that. But the caveat with them was that they were Washington State residents but lived in Virginia for school, was the information I knew, for school. And so going back to that day, left the hospital, and we had arranged to meet her at a church building that evening, because of her flight. And I don't remember all of the circumstances why it had to be hours later, but we lived about an hour from my hospital. And so instead of driving home and then driving back, my mom gave me that option, and I didn't want that option. So she just drove me around for 4 or so hours. I don't even know how many hours. She just drove me around while I sobbed in the car. And when I think back to that, I cannot imagine, as a mother now, what that had to have felt like for her. Because as a mom, you understand and you go through those things too. And I know it was hard on her too. Hard isn't even the right word, but
Devastating.
Yeah. So we go to the church building, and we're waiting, and I see a woman walk by, and again, this is one of those confirmation bias moments. My thought in my mind was, that's my baby's mom. And at the time, it was the Spirit speaking to me. In logic now, we were in a church building like on a Thursday night. There's nobody there. Of course it's her. Right? Like, I mean, there were a handful of other people, but I knew it was a tall brunette. So here comes a tall brunette, right? But at the time, it was the Spirit confirming to me of what this was. We went in there, and we met together. So it was my social worker, my mom, her, and I. And what was super interesting is that the husband didn't come out to get her. For the reason they gave was just a hollow answer. He couldn't get off work, or blah, 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 right? Right. I see your face, Kendra, and it's like, what the hell? Like, how do you not get off work to go pick up your child? Right.
Right.
And
right.
yeah, but it was so, the train had left the building. or, I mean, the train had left the station and I was on it. And so questions didn't matter at that point in time. All I needed was confirmation. That's all I needed over and over was confirmation. So he couldn't come. I couldn't think about why that felt weird to me. So we had, I mean, I am red-eyed and postpartum and, whatever. And we had this a short meeting, maybe 30 minutes, maybe. I don't remember it being very long at all, where very little was exchanged. One of the moments that stands out to me is I said, just so you know, she does have a big birthmark on her face, but it will fade. As I mean, you can see mine when I'm crying and when I'm angry. And so I was like, you can maybe see mine now because I'm crying, but most of the time it's not visible. And her reaction to it at the time was, as an adoptive mom, you would say, I don't care, they're perfect. Hers was, right. Well, what age will it fade away? And just like concern about this birthmark on her face. And I was taken back by, like, I don't know. I don't remember ever having mine be super visible. So, I mean, I don't know, kind of thing. And it struck me as odd, but then I was like, you know what, we're all in a hard situation. Maybe she just didn't respond the way. It is probably one of the most telling moments that there is when, as this continues to unfold, you'll understand why that was such a telling moment. She'd brought me a teddy bear and a little plaster, like a girl holding a baby. They have all those church ones that kind of what they are. And so she had given me the two of those. And I had like this little kind of just a few things from her. Before my daughter was born, I knew that I would want to have a safekeeping place. And so I had this box. I went and found this box and etched the name that I had given her into it, so that I would have a place that I could keep everything that she had. And so I had the hospital bands, I had her little hat, I had anything I could have to stay connected to her. So I added these little tokens into that box and kept the teddy bear close by and the little figurine there. I remember not feeling a whole lot of peace when I was meeting her. Like I had hoped, I'd hoped that it would be this whoosh of this is the right thing to do. And I attributed it to that it was just so difficult for me to feel past my emotions at that point in time. But again, I think that's a very telling thing. I'm a really good judge of character. When I meet people, I typically know them pretty well, and not in a judgmental way, but just I understand people really, really well and understand energies. And it's just something that I always have been. And so the fact that I didn't now is very interesting to me, that I didn't feel that. I just felt neutral from her. Whew. The cute part of that day is that my cute now husband didn't know what to do. And so after that, my mom drove me home, and he was at my house he's a health nut, with whole wheat fat-free hot dogs and whole wheat rolls buns, and it was so gross. And sliced cheese, like, just because he wanted to help in any way he could. And it was so disgusting and the sweetest thing in the whole world that you can even imagine. And we got together officially, well, not official, it was one of the official times, a couple of days afterwards, because he had gone through those emotions with me. The reason why we were so up and down is when we met, he had a girlfriend on a mission. And so I had my daughter in December, and this girl was coming home in February, and he had been engaged to her. She was who introduced him to the church. I'll get into him a little bit more in just a minute. And so that was definitely like the time that it was we're going to marry each other if we can just get past her coming home and, what have you. But that was really where we went from loving each other as best friends to being truly in love with each other. And it was sharing that experience with somebody that was so in tune to me at the time. And I joke that he's a robot and he expresses so little emotions, but he didn't need to say a lot of words. He sat with me. Prior to placing her, he was the only one that looked me in the eye. He said, when we were in the hospital, he said, "You don't have to do this."
Oh.
Oh. And I said to him, "Yes, I do." And he left it at that. And I hate that he feels a little bit of guilt towards that for not pushing farther. But he was the only one that ever told me outside of that. Whew.
So where nobody else was giving you a choice, the one person who actually does love you and sees you is giving you a choice. I mean, I think that is very telling. Very telling.
And I also think the fact that he wasn't so indoctrinated by the church, he was a member of the church, but he wasn't fully indoctrinated, still allowed him to have that normal perspective, right?
And trust his own intuition. Where it sounds like to me that when you saw the woman that was going to be the mother to your baby, you in true Mormon fashion, and tell me if I'm overstepping my bounds with this, but that you learn to gaslight yourself. You learn to gaslight yourself out of your own intuition and feel like you don't have a choice, when really the adoption wasn't final, right? Like you still had a choice, and you weren't willing to give yourself that choice because of all the indoctrination.
Right. 100%. Because had I not had that indoctrination, not feeling the things that I would have wanted to felt would have been a red flag to me. And it would have been like, hold on, put the brakes on. And I was so consumed by the redemption of adoption that I couldn't see past anything other than, this is what God wants for me. This is what God wants for my daughter. And I know this to be true, right? Like, it was so, I mean, I look back now and I mean, you can't live life with what ifs. You can't, like, it doesn't, but I do question, like, would I have actually placed her for adoption? And the answer is, I don't know. I mean, her biological father he was on meth shortly thereafter for a few years. And I found out, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but he came and saw me in the hospital while I was there. I called, which, if anything tells you the kind of person I am, that's it. I had called him to tell him that the baby was born. His mother was awful and said, "Well, she's kind of hard to give up, isn't she?" And just was kind of nasty on it. So he showed up at the hospital with a girlfriend and held her for a minute. I mean, it was difficult on him. I'm not going to ever dismiss that in any way, shape, or form. I had manipulated him, and with the help of my social worker, to be in this situation. Found out after just recently, or, I mean, not recently, but when my daughter did find me, spoiler alert, that that girlfriend was actually pregnant at the time. And so she ended up having a brother that was 7 months younger than her.
Wow.
Yeah. So knowing all of that, he wasn't wouldn't have been the best influence in her life. And so I did know who he was as the person at that time, right? He's he's a much, much better person now. But I knew who he was then. And so would it have been better for her to been raised by me and have to deal with all of that? I don't know, but I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. And that's where the problem comes in is, you can't look back, but I can be frustrated and hurt at the fact that I didn't have a choice, And I think I could have found more peace in this if I actually had made that choice, you know, and had more control over how to find the family, and not trusting the inspiration of the bishops and all of the loopholes. I mean, you have to go through quite a process to be able to be found worthy to place or to receive a baby. And so if I trusted all of those processes, and I trusted that there were people that were inspired to choose her, to select them to be willing to give a baby to, you know. And
Yeah.
now I know they'd let anybody through. They were in the business of exactly what you were saying, of this dichotomy of unwed girls and couples that needed children so that they could go on to the celestial kingdom. You know, I mean, it was a reciprocal screwed up system of that. So,
I wanted to point out something.
yes.
It's interesting, the parallels in our stories, because I found out after I started going, I think it was after I started going to church social services or something, that my sperm donor also had gotten a girl pregnant, but it was actually 2 months before I got
Wow.
pregnant. So I wasn't really even his girlfriend at the time, you
Mm.
know. But I mean, I thought I was, I
Yeah.
guess, but you know, realized that that wasn't really even the case. But the girl before me, she ended up giving her baby up for adoption through church social
Oh,
services. She
wow.
was a returned missionary. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. There are so many
Yeah.
parallels between our stories, Kendra.
A lot of parallels. Yep.
So many.
Yep.
Wow, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Let's see. And I think the other part to point out in all of that is, once I broke up with him, like, I didn't hear from him again. He called me one time before the LDS Social Services called him, and I saw him to sign our papers, and then I called him when she was born. And so I also knew that I didn't have his support. I didn't have confidence in our ability to co-parent together. And so that definitely like plays into it. And it's confirmation bias. It confirmed the church's stance that placing the baby is the very best choice. And so would I have? Maybe. I don't know. And I can't live in that thought a whole lot, because it's not the reality of the situation. So then the next part of the story goes on to, you know, as I think about this, and you know, as I tell my story more, lots of people are like, oh my gosh, you need to write a book, you need to write a movie, or whatever. And I love to kind of like have a visual of this, is that I have on my, this is where the light and the bright part of my story comes in, as she's having her side of the story that isn't light and bright. And so I'll tell you where I'm at, and then tell you a little bit more about her childhood when I talk about when she finds me. So my husband and I ended up getting married. It was 2.5 years after she, well, yeah, 2.5 years after she was born. And we'd been, like I said, friends before that. We were sealed in the temple. He, like I said, was a convert, and the temple scared the crap out of him. Like, he had been to other churches and other religions, and you know, where they are speaking in tongues or whatever, and he was like, this feels almost the same thing as that. And I was like, oh shoot, who did I marry? He's not going to be the strongest priesthood holder, you know. I mean, he's not going to do family home evenings and, you know, whatever. And I was like, oh man, did I make the right choice? Which just makes me sick to think about, because how could I even question it? How could I even question? During our rocky part, after I'd placed her for adoption, I had dated a couple of other guys, and well, he dated her again and whatever. But the truth of it is the only person that could understand it as a husband would have been him. And anybody else, it would have been a story, not a feeling, to go with it. And so to 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 have ever questioned whether or not I should have married him because of his lack of faith in the church just makes me so sick now to think about.
Yeah.
He ended up going to school. We moved across the state to Eastern Washington, and were kind of experienced the best years of our life during that time period. My oldest daughter I raised was born 2.5 years after I placed my oldest daughter for adoption. See, it's confusing. How many kids do you have? Well, I have two oldest daughters. I mean, it's a really, really tricky thing to kind of navigate. I did not fully grasp the depth of placing a child for adoption until I had my oldest daughter. And talk about a time of, I mean, you talk about postpartum depression. You add this on top to it. And, I mean, I already said that I, struggled with anxiety, and that's coupled with depression too. And it was a very dark time, very, very, very dark time. Add to that we still lived in Seattle, and it was record days that the sun did not come out. The months that she was a newborn baby. So to say that I was depressed is an understatement. When she was a year old is when we moved over to go to school, for my husband to go to school. And all of a sudden it turned bright again. And we met some of the best, we're still best friends with these families, and they had kids. We all had kids the same age. And it just was an awesome time, that we just all supported each other. We were young parents, all of us as wives, our husbands were in school, and we got to raise our kids in a community. I had my second daughter while we lived there, or third, which one do we want to call it? my second raised child, while we lived there. And it just was a magical time. My girls had a great childhood while we were there, and in grasping the severity of having placed a child for adoption, I went all in as a mom. I was the best possible mom I could have possibly been. I did all the things, the room mom, everything. I was the attentive mom, and not in a way that was overly, it was who I wanted to be. It was fulfilling. It was hard. I thrived in the hard of it, minus depression and anxiety. But I loved being a mother, and oh my gosh, my girls are the best kids in the whole world. They were so fun. And I just loved it. And it was just this beautiful time. My husband was able to accelerate and got his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in 7 years. Finished his career. He had a 2 years associates when we moved over there to Pullman, is where the little city of, I love it. It's just like our little happy place. But so he was able to complete his bachelor's, master's, and PhD while we were there. And so we didn't have to move. We could have this awesome support. And he graduated with his PhD, and we ended up moving to Florida. And again, it's a bright, sunny time in my life, literally bright, sunny, with it being Florida. My youngest was 4 at the time. My other daughter was 7. And when we were in Pullman and going to school, we weren't super active at church because my husband prioritized school over church. And again, I saw that as a flaw. And I saw that as he wasn't a worthy priesthood holder, and begrudged him, and not knowing, right? All of these things are now, I understand in deconstructing everything, but that did exist. And we felt a lot of guilt for not going to church. We called ourselves the Sacrament Meeting Dodgers, and we sit on the back row and then run out. And didn't have a temple recommend for 10 years after we got married because the temple didn't jive with him. I remember a time while he was in school, he doesn't remember this, but I remember this extremely clearly, that he came to me while he was in a anthropology class, I think. And he is a science brain, like he is a scientist, my husband is. And he was so conflicted about how to reconcile evolution with the church doctrine. Like he stopped believing it all. And he's like, I don't know if I can continue on. And I remember this moment so clearly because I felt like he was asking me to choose between church and him, and I didn't know if I could make that choice. And I told him it was like a bait and switch, that he better get on board, and we're not going to raise our girls like that. And, just came into it hard with him about it. Like, this is how it's going to be, if we're going to do this. So when we moved to Florida, like, something happened. Neither of us know, but all of a sudden we were just going to church. Like 3 months later, we looked at each other and we're like, so I guess we're doing this, huh? And, all right, I guess we're in. And he got put into elders quorum right away, and I got put in some callings, and they required us to have our temple recommend. So we, got our temple recommends again, and we were all in at church. We were all in. It was a small ward. He served in the bishopric, elders quorum president, high counselor, bishopric again. I was Relief Society secretary, primary president, young women's president. We were all in, and it was wonderful because it was this family that we had down there. Some of my best friends were from there too, and it's, the church gave us everything that the positives that the church gives at that time. We had this community, we had a place. I'm struggle anxiety. Moving across the country by myself was the scariest thing I've ever done. It was so scary, and I could move there and I could find friends, and it gave me a network, and it was everything that we needed at the time. And we look back now, and with the church having been such a wedge in our marriage, we look back now and are so grateful to it during that time frame, because it brought us, I'm the youngest of 6. He's an only child. I was raised in the church. He was raised out of the church. And so it brought us to where we could have more of a common ground to be able to raise our girls with less conflict among the two of us. And so for that part of it, there's a lot of gratitude that I have for during those years. And my kids got to grow up in Florida, and that's a pretty cool thing. And we loved it there. We really, really, really did. And we were all in on church, like literally all in. My husband, I will say, always had some things that were, his shelf was always heavier than mine was. I was a follower and I was a believer. I had redemption. I had to make up for the scarlet letter, and he was 21 when he got baptized, or 20. And he didn't have to prove anything. He was still affected by the guilt that the church gives, but he could take some of the things and be like, yeah, that doesn't really apply to me. And anytime you did that, then it was, why aren't you a better priesthood holder? And he never really believed in Joseph Smith, but was willing to kind of put that on a shelf. The funniest story of him is when he was talking to the missionaries, when he was getting ready to be baptized. He said, okay, I can do this. I've read the Book of Mormon a couple of times, but my question is where's the elephants? Like, there's no archaeological evidence of the elephants on the American continent. So, in the poor missionaries were probably blah, 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 blah. So we joke that always one of his things was, where's the elephants? And that never went away. He's a scientist. He works with animals. He's, this is his jam, and he knows all of this stuff. And so, even while we were all in, he still had those feelings. And if anything, it just kind of wedged us farther apart from each other during that time period. So while I was there, my daughter turned 18. And the deal with when you place a child for adoption through LDS Social Services at the time was, when they turn 18, you can register, quote unquote, with them to be found. I can call LDS Social Services and say, she's 18, I'd love to be found. And then if she wants to find me, she calls them, and we can live happily ever after, right? That's the story that was told. So she turns 18, and I should back up just a second on that. My other 2 daughters always knew about her, from the time that they could comprehend, they knew that she existed. My family had me hide it. When I was pregnant, I had some older nieces and nephews, and we couldn't tell them that I was pregnant. My nephew was sitting on my lap on Thanksgiving a month before she was born. And he was like, whoa, Myndee, you ate a lot for Thanksgiving. And my response was, oh, take him off and, have him go somewhere else. And so
Right.
I don't know who of my nieces and nephews even knew, because there's only a few that were born at that time, but my family did not talk about it at all. And it was a hidden thing, because they wanted, the exact words were, they didn't want to ruin the reputation of their special Mimi, their aunt, and didn't want to do anything to harm that image that I had to them. And I'm still their favorite aunt. My sisters are going to get mad, but I still am. We still know I'm the favorite aunt.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I was not going to hide it from my children at all, ever. I had that little box, and I would show them some of the things. I should say that I did get pictures of her through her first year. I'm jumping all over ahead. I'm sorry. There's just things to remember about it. One of the important parts to note about this right now is, as I got these letters, they were all addressed as, we love her, we, da 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 da. It was all we's that are in there, and that's going to become important in just a little bit. And so I never wanted my girls to not know about her. I never wanted it to be a moment. We had that spiritual connection, soul to soul connection, that she would find me. And so it was never a question that she would find me. And so I never wanted it to be a moment for my girls of, so guess what? You have a half sister. I never wanted that. And so they just grew up with it. And my youngest, the cutest little firecracker girl, I called her my spicy girl. She went through this phase where she just would tell every teacher everywhere that she has a half sister. And we lived in Florida, and that was just common. People say that all the time. And one of my siblings came to visit with their kids, and I told her, I said, you can't say that to them, because I don't know if they know. And so I hated that. I'm like, just keep it secret between our family, because we don't want to, whatever. We don't need to tell mom's secret to everybody. It's so stupid now.
Yeah.
And I think if my siblings could go back, they would do it different. Again, they were just under the advice of what they knew and they understood at the time. And so, but again, it doesn't change the shame that brought to me at all. So she's 18, and I called the Seattle office of LDS Social Services, and my counselor was the one that actually answered the phone, and she remembered me amazingly.
Oh, wow.
She was an awesome person. She was really, really an awesome person. And I mean, things like, yeah, your dad worked for CES, didn't he? And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. It's like, she remembered me. And she said, I think that her adoptive mom actually just called here recently, asking some questions. And so she might be ready to find you. And of course, that got my hopes up. And so the advice that I was given is to go to the specific website and register there, and put as much information in there as you want, but basically where she was born, what my name is, what hospital, those kinds of things. One thing I did want to say about the hospital, though, that was a very sweet moment when my oldest daughter was born, that I actually had the same doctor for the two girls, my two oldest, and when my oldest daughter was, when she was born, my sweet doctor came and sat on the bed next to me and held my hand, and he goes, this is the one you get to keep. And it was the sweetest moment. And to say there were angels in my life is an understatement. There were always people that were compassionate and understood and saw me for me. And I think that's part of one of the reasons why I can be where I'm at today, is because I was lucky to have people like that were happy for me in my life and understood what I had gone through, So I registered, and she didn't find me. And I was talking to my best friend, all 18 years of her life. On her birthday, I set that day aside as a day that I didn't do anything. I would take off work. I would do, once I had kids, my husband took the kids. We all knew that was my day in the year that I got to feel. And I got to do what I needed to do, because every other day of the year it was locked away. And so on that day, on her 18th birthday, and I had already made the call to LDS Social Services, my best friend at the time said, Myndee, what if her life wasn't all that you thought it was? What if it wasn't? What if the reason she's looking for you is because she's had a hard life? And my friend wasn't Mormon, and so she just didn't understand. That was my logic. She just didn't understand, because I had made a deal with God. If I was going to go through with this Abrahamic sacrifice, he was going to take care of her. And she just didn't understand that because she wasn't Mormon. And she didn't understand the gospel and blah, 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 right? And that was probably one of the best gifts in my life, was that she put that little tiny, just that one question, because up until then, I had a whole story that was built. I had this whole beautiful story of what her life had been. And to just have that one moment of, what? Questioning that set the footwork for what would happen when she did find me. And gave me a place to kind of begin at that point. So it's her 18th birthday. I don't hear anything. And that year we actually decided it was time to move back to Utah so my girls could, back for me, my husband never lived here. My girls had never lived here, but we wanted them to have a relationship with cousins and with family and all of that. So we decided to move back here. And I want to stay on my linear instead of too many tangents. Sorry. It wasn't great for my girls, but my oldest met her now husband, and so we can't live with a whole lot of regrets, but it was hard, really, really hard for them to assimilate into. We moved back to Davis County, and to assimilate back into the bubble that is Davis County, when they've had lots of life experiences out, in Florida, where they knew what life really was like, and these kids had all grown up together. They were all, had gone to church from the time they were little, and it was really, really hard for them to assimilate in, even though we were members. So then, let's see. So finally, her 21st birthday comes around, and was it birthday? You know what? It was 6 months after she turned 21. One morning, I wake up to Facebook, and it says, sorry to just ask you a strange question, but did you happen to place a child for adoption? A baby girl for adoption? And I was taking my youngest to Lagoon that day with all of her friends, and I saw the message, and I clicked on her profile, and I started scrolling through. I saw that she had 2 babies, and started scrolling through, and I saw a picture in there that was one of the ones that I had been given in the 1 year that it was, just a baby picture of her. And I just, holy moly, like there's no words for that. And I'm there, and I'm shaking. My husband's out of town. Anytime anything big happens, my husband's out of travel. He travels all the time. So he's out of town, and my cute darling daughter calls up. She's like, Mom, are you ready to go? I'm like, I need a minute. What do I do with this information? And so I get myself together, and I call my husband, and he doesn't pick up because he ends up he's at conferences a lot. And I left him a message, and I never leave him messages. And I said, call me back as soon as possible. And he called me back, and all I could say is, she found me. She found me. And he's like, I'm getting on a plane right now. Oh, wow. She lived in Logan, and our messages are so cute to go back and look at from that day, because my answer back to her was, yes, I did. In Seattle in 1994, is that you? And she says, yes, I think it is, 2 exclamation points. And then, like, to watch our conversation go, it grew by exclamation points back and forth. And just this surrealness of like, oh my gosh, is this actually happening? Like, is this for real? And we said, let's make arrangements to meet this weekend. And I'm like, that's too far away. That's too far away. I can't wait that long. And so, and she's like, well, we were already planning to come down to Farmington. So Farmington and Logan are about 90 minutes away, somewhere between an hour and a half. And she's like, we were going to come down to Farmington this weekend. And I'm like, I don't know if I can wait that long. She's like, I don't want you to. Do you want to come tonight? And I'm like, yes, actually I do. So yeah. My girls were both out playing. And I called them home, and our dog at the time had cancer, and they were convinced that I was calling them home because our dog was going to be dying. And so I sat him down and I said, your half sister found me. And they looked at me in shock, and they were like, wait, so Roxy's okay? It was so cute because of how nonchalant it was. And then the questions started coming, of like, where is she? I showed them pictures, and they were so sweet and so supportive. And I called my sister who was here and told her I was going up. She's like, I'm driving you up. I don't want you driving up by yourself. And my girls helped me get ready and pick out an outfit to wear that day. And we went over to my brother's house because my husband was out of town, and I had asked my brother, for a blessing to try and calm. I don't know, like, what do you do but turn to Heavenly Father at this point in time, right? Like, that's all I knew to turn. And there is so many emotions. When I called my brother, he was up running in the mountains, and usually it's a text. And so for him to see a message from me, and he was like, I'll be home in just a few minutes, and anyway, so he gave me a blessing that night, and I still hold to those words. And this is when you deconstruct from the church, it's things like this that are really hard to kind of reconcile, because the things that he told me were so relevant and so important, and that she had a rough life, and she needed me in her life. And I don't even remember all it is. That was the very most important thing, that it's going to be a rocky road, and to cling on to the things that you already know. And I have my own theories of why things like that can and do happen with blessings. More so, I think it has to do with the emotional connection that comes. Maybe there is some intuition that comes with it, but at the time it was confirmation. It was from Heavenly Father. It was Heavenly Father giving me a gift back in my life. I had spent, I don't even know how many hours just pleading. I just remember having these feelings in all of the years before that of like, please, please, please let her be okay. And now looking back, part of me knew she wasn't. And I was just begging Heavenly Father to please take care of her. Please hold up your end of the deal. Look, I'm doing my job. We've got a temple recommend. I'm a great mother. Please be holding up your end of the bargain. And now I can recognize that it just was this intuition that it wasn't happening. So my sister and sister-in-law drove me up to Logan that night. I was so irritated that they were having conversations about anything but this, because my mind was just so like, the cycle of thoughts is just crazy, because is she gonna remember me? Is she mad at me? What if I don't feel a connection with her? What if, like, the biggest was, is she going to be mad at me? Does she hold anger towards me? And it didn't appear to be from our messages, but it's still the biggest fear, and what if we don't connect? Not all adoption reunion stories are beautiful, and ours gets messy, but what if we didn't feel that connection that I had felt in the hospital with her? What if I'd just been making that up? What if? The depth of the emotion when she drove away was only matched by the heightened of emotions when she opened the door. We pulled up, and I saw the house, and I'm like, my daughter lives there. My daughter lives in the house. She's right there. And I couldn't think. I just had to go up to the door, and she opened the door, and we both just sobbed. Because our souls knew each other again. The soul that we knew was there. And we talk alike. We have mannerisms alike. Our hands are, we talk with our hands a lot. I'm not right now because I'm holding this steady, but we're both very animated, and it just, she said it was like looking in a mirror for her. And she's the perfect morph between the two of us and got the best of both of us. And so I could see myself in her, and she could see herself in me. And one of the first questions I asked was, how do your parents feel about this, you finding me? And she said, so my dad left when I was 9 months old.
Oh.
I said, he what? She said, yeah, he left when I was 9 months old. I just want to make it clear that adoptions aren't final till they're 6 months. He left 3 months after that.
Wow.
And I didn't even know what to think at that moment. And now when I'm telling you this and I go back to those letters, how I'm going to tell you this next part isn't going to be very linear because it's a flood of whatever. I'll try to keep the timeline pretty well, but later I read those letters back from her, and the we throughout all of the letters just made me sick to my stomach because it was outright deception.
Yeah.
Outright deception. I had brought her hospital bands in her hat so that she could know that she was connected to me. And she, with her 2 daughters, had made a shadow box of their hat and hospital bands and had cherished those. And so for me to have brought those to her were just this, our souls connected. Our souls connected. And they were always connected, you know. I don't even know all the things that were said, but, I said, okay, well, how about your mom? And she's like, well, that's a complicated situation. And I'm like, okay, like, adoption reunions can be messy, whatever, but she's an adult. She's 21 years old. She's married. She has 2 children. We went to dinner that night, and all I could do was just look at my baby grandkids and be like, I'm their grandma. I'm their grandma's grandma. They were 2 and 2 months. One of them was 2 months. One of them was 2 years old. They were just babies. And my darling little oldest granddaughter just jumped in my arms and we call them leg hugs, and just wrapped herself around me. And she's the most articulate little bright child. And that connection was there. But it was so overwhelming. I couldn't really process it all. And I just kept touching my daughter and going, this is real. This is real. And I said to her that night, I said, I will be in your life as much or as little as you want me to be. And she's like, as much. I want you in my life. And and it was just comparing, like, what about this, kind of a thing. And she asked me about her father then. And the irony of it is, about 2 months before that, I had found, I didn't know on Facebook there was a place where you could have messages where you had to accept them if they weren't friend requests. And I had found that he had sent me a letter or a message like 4 years before asking if I had had any contact with him. And so I knew that he was on Facebook, and I knew that he would have wanted to see her. So I told her what his name was that night so that she could have that as reference too. And but the feeling between her and the woman who raised her, I don't like to call her mom because she hasn't earned that title, just became very clear that it was more and more complicated than just an adoption reunion being difficult on an adoptive mom. And she kept kind of brushing things off, not wanting to say a whole lot negative, and we just kind of focused on each other and just the surrealness of the situation. That night, it was the strangest thing to go home and be like, I know where my daughter is. And wake up a mom of teenagers carpooling to Lagoon and going home or falling asleep at grandma. Like, it's a pretty surreal day. And wake up the next morning and can text her and know where she's at, can call her. It was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. My husband got home, and I can't even remember the timeline. It doesn't really matter. I brought the girls and him up to meet her, and the little girls and her husband, and it was just instant chemistry with everybody. Like, it just was like this beautiful moment of me living there and going, my 3 daughters are right here in front of me, and my 2 granddaughters were women strong. We got a lot of girl power in our family. My poor husband is he's so great. And so it was just this real moment of all of them being there. I don't even know. I can't even tell you about all of the amazing things that he is, but he just is. And I hope that I can throw it in there enough to give it credit, because he's really just an incredible human. But one of the things she told me that night that sticks out the very most is that she told me she'd been in a residential treatment facility from the age of 14 to 17. And so in my mind, immediately, come to find out later that it was a 9-month program. And she was in there for those 3 formative years of her life. She had conceived my oldest granddaughter at 18. We placed the fact that we had a phone call, that when I called and they said that that she had been looking for me at LDS Social Services to when she was pregnant. In order to find me, she had, this will tell you how tenacious this girl is. She called Utah LDS Social Services when she was 18 years old, and she was told to register on a different website than I was told, at the Seattle website that I had been told from Seattle. So she registered on one website, I registered on another, and we both waited. And she took it as I didn't want her to find me, and I took it as she didn't want to find me. Right? Like, we both just assumed that we weren't in a place to be able to reconnect. The other one wasn't, even though we both had been wanting to. But the tenacity of this girl, she got on Facebook. She knew she was born in Seattle. I should mention that even though she lived in Virginia, she had moved around quite a few times, and it was pretty amazing that she lived here in Utah while I lived here in Utah too, and that we were only that close, not far away from each other. So she went and searched at the time. So my legal name is Melinda, and that was the only name that she knew of me. And she went and searched on Facebook every single woman that could be remotely close to my age that lived in Seattle named Melinda. And she messaged and messaged and messaged and messaged every single person she could find. And I had intentionally kept on my Facebook page my maiden name, so that if that came up, then she could find me that, and then an alias of Melinda. And so during that search, I had come up, and she was like, no, she doesn't live in Utah. And she also encountered a girl, this is going to be a messy story, but not messy part of it because it wasn't me, but a girl that said, I'm not her, but I'm willing to help you find her. And together they were able to find her birth certificate, her original birth certificate, because at 18, I think, is when the adoption records are no longer sealed, so she could request it and find it at that point in time. And it was because it was shortly after the birth of her second daughter that kind of resurfaced this wanting to find me that much more. You know, I mean, when you give birth, you think about your mom, and you know, I mean, and she's being a mom for this time, you know, this amount of time, and she understands what I've been going through. She was an unwed mother with an illegitimate child too. with a guy that was not fit to be a parent. And so she understood a lot of that. She chose to parent where I chose to place for adoption, but she understood a lot of what I had gone through in placing her. So the residential treatment facility was a big red flag. I asked her about some of the things that I had sent to her, like the quilt that my mom and my sister and I had made, and she'd never received it. She'd never even seen it. She didn't know that it even existed. She said she'd seen a hat.
Wow.
Yeah. She said she'd always known that she was adopted, but she was supposed to hide it from people. She wasn't supposed to tell people. She just heard the story from somebody that knew her at the time, that when she was in second or third grade, that she had this cute thing where she said she was adopted to to all of her friends and whatever, and she told her class that she was adopted. And this woman made her march back to her class and tell the class she was lying, because she wasn't supposed to know that she was adopted. The world, it looked too poorly upon this woman for her daughter to have been adopted.
That's awful.
It's awful. The things that she described, when you hear a child goes into residential treatment facility, you immediately jump to the worst case scenario, right? Drugs, stealing, whatever. I mean, this place is your last stop before jail. I mean, that's basically what it is. And she's telling me the things that she did, and I'm like, that's just normal teenage stuff. Like, where's the meat? Like, what was it that caused you to go in there? And it's not adding up. It's not adding up at all. Like, I'm like, it's so benign compared to so many other truly difficult teenagers. And, but I kind of assumed that it was her underplaying things, right? Because clearly she was broken. Clearly that relationship was not what I thought it would be. But this woman had been on a pillar to me for so many years that it couldn't be true. She just doesn't understand, right? This couldn't be true. She was vetted through the LDS Social Services. She, maybe the divorce was not her fault. I mean, all of the, like you said, it's a perfect word, gaslighting myself and assuming that it was on my daughter, not on this woman. And I hate that I even had those thoughts. It wasn't very long before I started believing her. But I mean, in fairness, that was my initial thoughts. And just understandably so, One of the most beautiful things that happened after she found me is she got in contact with her biological father. They connected very, very quick as well. It was traumatizing for him too. He ended up coming down for like within a week. I can't remember the timing of everything at this point because it was all a whirlwind. My husband had already made plans that he was taking my girls to Yellowstone during that following week, and he was like, "We can cancel," and I'm like, "No, it's okay, you go." So my husband was out of town. He ended up coming down to see her. The biological father did, and my daughter got nervous about it at the last minute, and I said, I'll come up and I'll stay with you. And when I got there, he had already just gotten there too, and we saw each other. And when you know us and know where we're at now, this was a miraculous moment that we saw each other, and we just started crying and gave each other a huge hug and said, she found us. She found us. And we coexisted in the most beautiful way for 24 hours, maybe 36 hours. The next day, I was able to sleep over, and the next day, as we were talking about all of the things that we missed out on life. And so we decided to make the next day what we've now termed the best day ever. And we made a list of 21 things that we had missed out on in her life. And we were determined to do them all the next day, the three of us together. Yeah. So
how cute. I love that.
It was the funnest day. We went to McDonald's, we made a sandcastle, we went to the mall together. We, just some really, really cute things. And it is miraculous that it happened, because he and I hate each other. But we could be there on that day, and it was just a great day. I have a picture of us, he and I, looking up at stars together while I'm holding my baby granddaughter. And, we were able to just converse and kind of catch up on life and time. And we got her some cupcakes and sang her happy birthday. And all bawled while we did that, because, wow, that was poignant. We slept over again one more day, and by that next day, we didn't like each other again. And my husband came back through town with my daughters, and remember, they knew each other. And so for him to know that I'd married my husband, I had broken up with him to be with my husband. And it was just kind of a surreal moment for all of us, of like, this is where we're at now. And I remember saying to the biological father, I said, I think you need to be grateful to my husband, because without him, I would hate you. Turns out I still do. Actually, I don't hate him. But my cute oldest granddaughter now says, Mimi, I just can't picture you guys together. Like, how did that happen? And I'm like, I know, sweetie, so your mom could get here. And she's like, it took me a long time to realize that you guys dated, huh? So anyway, so there was that beautiful moment of the best day ever. And what followed after that was just magical. I mean, it was just this download of information, and magical and horrifying, because the longer she was in, the more trust that she gained from me, that I was going to be a safe person to her, the more horror stories I just kept hearing. Her reasons for being in the residential treatment facility were, we still don't know. I still don't know. She did run away from home one time. Her reasons for running away from home were valid. Any child would have at that point in time. Severe mental abuse, of living with a woman with a personality disorder. What the personality disorder is, we don't know. But it's conditional love, and it is a relationship of earning love. And it's very narcissistic. And so it's the cycle of narcissism, of pleasing to get back into the good graces, and then clinging to those good graces and living through the hell that follows along with that. And she says that she remembers it starting around age 8, but prior to that, she knew that she didn't have the support. Another important piece of the story is that I knew that the mom had been in Virginia for school. Well, I had no idea. She was in medical school. And so she was hardly not even, and the father left when she was 9 months old. If I had had this information, there's not a chance I would have chosen that. There's not a chance I would have known that. We recently found out from a very reliable source that they actually even had divorce papers drawn up when they got her. They weren't filed, but they were drawn up.
Wow.
I was lied to.
It's quite the deception. Yeah, it's quite the deception.
And shouldn't there have been a spirit of discernment with the bishops, with the social workers in this inspired process? Shouldn't have been somebody that caught it, a bishop that doesn't. How do you not know that there's a family going through divorce when you're signing off on divorce papers?
Yeah. Well, why did they want to adopt her when they were getting a divorce?
that's the ultimate question. My theory on it, based on what I know now, is the status of it. Because she couldn't have children, and so she was an outcast in the Mormon world. And so this gave her status. Yeah. She went on to adopt a girl from Guatemala when my daughter was 7. That's when she remembers things shifting for her. I genuinely think it was just the status of it, because being a woman in the church that cannot conceive children is an awful place to be. I want to kind of start all of this, kind of go into this part of it with a caveat as well. Something that I want to kind of put out there is, with having been abused, I'm a very forgiving person. I've forgiven my abuser. I do want to talk about forgiveness a little bit more, but this is genuinely, I love to give people second chances. This woman has not earned a second chance with me. She is still not a good person and still continues to do harm to my daughter and my granddaughters now. And I don't hate people, but I hate her. And if she did one thing to take accountability ever, I could change that. And I would love to. I would love to be able to have a relationship with her.
Did she finish
Yep.
medical school? Did she actually finish it?
Yep.
Okay. So then she worked as a doctor and then wasn't around anyway. Yep. Yeah.
And
okay. And didn't have support probably from a spouse or
right.
from.
I think she remarried
okay.
she did remarry at a certain point, but that was not a healthy relationship for my daughter. She did have another man in her life. I don't remember exactly what it was. A lot of these details kind of get messy to me, and so I'll do my best to kind of share them. But there was one man in her life that was super important to her. But yes, she was a single mom working as a physician.
Yeah, it sounds like it was really messy. You know,
and to be fair, my daughter doesn't have a great timeline on things either. She was a trauma victim her entire life, and so she was a good journal writer, and so there is, evidence of what she did go through. And she spent her life being gaslit. And so even to this day, something bad happens and she doesn't believe it's as bad as what it is. And the things that she endured as a child, she had no idea were wrong. I mean, she would say something to me and I was like, what? She did what? And she was like, is that not normal? No, that's not normal. No, that's not normal. I mean, just, I don't even think I can retell all of the horrific things because they're so subtle. They're so subtle and so gaslit that it's hard to even remember what they are. It's just this overall feeling of just awfulness, and she would just tell me one thing. And I mean, one of them I remember, which now I laugh that it was such a big deal to me, but it makes sense why it was a big deal, is that she said that at one point she went to a babysitter's house so that her mom could go to a singles ward to date. And yeah. Thank you for your reactions to that. And my daughter didn't think there was anything wrong with that. And in my mind, I was like, that was my primary. I asked specifically for a letter to find out about the church. That was one of my primary things, is if you're not going to be married and not hold a temple recommend so that my daughter can be sealed to you, because all children in the church services are sealed to their parents, right? At least take her to church, right? And her story of getting baptized was not what it should have been. The church never fully took to my daughter, which now I am so grateful for. But at the time when she found me, I doubled down on church, because maybe it was my fault again that all of this happened, because maybe I wasn't worthy to pick the family. Maybe, right? I had put her with this woman. And God and I had an arrangement, and God doesn't he doesn't make mistakes. It's all got to be for a reason. So what's the reason? Me. I'm the reason.
Isn't that the answer for
Yep.
everything that we go through when we're in the church? If I am having depression, if I'm having anxiety, if I'm not understanding, if I don't feel the Spirit, if I am questioning, it's all because I'm not doing enough, or it's all because I'm not doing it right,
Satan
or
in
it's
my
all
life.
because.
But the good things,
Yeah.
but the good things, let's not forget that the good things are all the church's responsibility, or God.
They're all attributed to the church. The church has ownership over your good things in your life.
We're so grateful for the gospel in our life for those good things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, aren't we? Aren't we though?
Yeah, screw that. Screw that. So I doubled down. Like, of course I doubled down because it had to be me. It had to have been me. And what was happening during this magical time is, number one, the moment she found me, and we both went into a trauma state. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. And the more I heard about her story, the more I went into a trauma state. And I had to save her. I had to save her. And the only way I knew to save her was to get her back to church. Like, that's what we do, right? Like, we get them back to the gospel. My brother had given me a blessing that said that she needed me in her life. Well, there we go. I'm going to bring her back to church. That's why she needs me, is because I'm going to bring her back to church. And so I gave her pseudo. Go ahead.
Did his blessing say that she needed the gospel in her life, or that she needed
That's
you in
her life? I remember me, that she needed me. I don't remember.
But you interpreted that as she needed you to be a good Mormon in her life.
That was my interpretation of it. I don't think his words were fully that, but it's definitely.
But because it was a Mormon blessing,
well,
right?
In the narrative I had been given, I mean, that's all I knew, right? Like, our ulterior motive as a Mormon is to convert the world, and every relationship is hijacked by converting. And so, of course, my daughter. Yeah, go ahead. You got something.
Including funerals. Including funerals.
Yes.
You can't even have a funeral without it being hijacked by a missionary experience in the church.
Yep. And I mean, of course, at the time I didn't recognize that. Of course I didn't. Right.
Of course. No,
I was
of course not.
put into the Relief Society presidency with the very best women, and we did amazing things for being very nuanced Mormons. And in Little Davis County, it was making massive strides. And I just kept trying to fit her into my box and tried to make it so she could leave behind her life and just be assimilated into ours, and gave her very Mormon conditional love. I believed it was unconditional. I accept you for all of this, but you need to change. Right. And
absolutely.
But I love you no matter what. But can you, you know, whatever. And she's an amazing person, and she's lived through hell in her life, and is a remarkable person despite it, or because of it, or whatever. And the fact that I ever wanted to change her just makes me ill, makes me sick. And I am so grateful she gave me a chance to do better again. So tensions built, obviously, but it still felt magical. But slowly but surely I could start feeling my younger daughter starting to resent her. I started to feel her pull away. She started to feel kind of like a caged animal to me. She ended up divorcing that husband, and she moved in with us for a minute. It was about 4 months, and everything exploded because, number one, I didn't know how to parent an adult child. Number two, it wasn't my place to parent her. Number three, I was still trying to fit her into a box, and I could probably go on up to 100 reasons why it would explode, because what goes up must come down in equal whatever. And the high was high, and this low was awful. We said and did things to each other that are just horrific now, that are they're not congruent to who we are at all. Because we hit our trauma point. We hit the point of absolutely just unraveling, you know. The night she moved out of my house, I had my first, that I knew of, actual nervous breakdown. I came all the way upstairs to my husband and I just was sobbing, and I'm like, I can't lose her again. I can't lose her again. I'm going to lose her, and I can't lose her again. And I don't understand her. I don't know who she is. I felt like she'd been lying to me the whole time, because she was trying to fit in this box that she didn't fit in. And so she was saying all the right things to me, trying to fit in the box. And now none of them were true. And I didn't understand that they could have been true at the moment, but because she wanted to assimilate too, and she wanted to be part of this family, and she wanted the trauma of her life to have not existed too. And how horrible for her to have lived this life of hell and come and see me, and I'm an amazing mom. And the jealousy that she had to have felt towards my girls, I can't even comprehend. And this feeling of unwantedness that she had experienced, not only in utero, but the rest of her life. You know, I mean, how can you take an adopted child to a residential treatment facility? Like, it just is unfathomable. A child that is born with attachment issues, and leave them, and have the father leave, and right? Like, and so to bring that into our home of me trying to say, I love you, I love you, I love you, and shower her with love, but come back to church, come back to church. And it was even, if you're going to live in our house, you've got to go to church. It doesn't have to be our church. And I was pretending to be super, right, thank you, like, I'm open-minded about this, but find God. And, oh, look, do you want to sit during general conference with us? And, you know, just all of the grossness. So I had this.
Well, it's all forced. That's all forced. It's not, it's just the same thing about choice, right? It wasn't your choice really to give her up for adoption. And her coming back, it's not really a choice as to whether or not she goes to church and does these things. If she wants to maintain a relationship with you as her mother, then I want to be loved. I want to feel this love, right? So the only way to feel that love is to do the things that you want me to do.
Which was modeled for her,
which
then goes. That's how she was in a parent-child relationship her whole life, is playing the game, right? And so of course she's going to play it with me. And then I've got my Mormon narrative that's taken over, and I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster. And so she moved out with doors slamming and just yuckiness. And we didn't talk for probably close to 2 years, outside of just kind of curt texts about me seeing the granddaughters. She still wanted me involved in their life, but we didn't know how to coexist together. We were not safe people for each other, and understandably so. Very, very understandably so on both parts. We both thought each other were at fault, and we were, and we weren't, and neither of us were, you know?
Right.
So what came from that is that my daughters could finally come clean with all of the feelings that they had of what having me so wrapped up in this relationship had done to them. And I had burned their trust. I would do anything to save my oldest daughter from any pain. And so that, even if it meant being deceptive to my own family. And again, that's not me. That's not me in any way, shape, or form. I am such a transparent person. So to do any kind of deception, even in just little tiny things that weren't a big deal, but to have any, says the state that I was in, because it's not me. And so my daughters, all of them hated each other. They were their biggest triggers. They never wanted to see each other again. They just had horrible feelings about each other. My other two daughters were, I got them into therapy. And they were able to, it took a while to regain their trust. And during that 2 years that we didn't talk, I focused solely on rebuilding my relationship with them and my husband, and just making them the priority and putting her on the back burner, because I needed to repair those relationships before I could even contemplate incorporating her back into my life at all. It After that breakdown, the night that she left, I scared my husband. I actually scared, because he was leaving to go out of town the next day, of course, because all things happen, all the hard things happen when he's out of town. But the night before, I actually took, I don't even remember what it was, but I was just screaming, and I actually took a brush and threw it at him across the room, and it scared him. I mean, it really, really scared him. And he had my brother come in and check in on me on the regular, because I was in a dark place, and really, really dark place. And he encouraged me to find a therapist. And this will tell you how the state of mind is. He came about 2 weeks later. He came back and he was like, "Why don't you have a therapy appointment yet?" And I said, "I called and she didn't call me back. She doesn't want me." I'm just so broken that she didn't even want me. And like everything, I just was a piece of shit. I had ruined every relationship that mattered to me. I was ashamed to my family. Our reunion was very public on Facebook, and so now I had to face everybody that I knew that this wasn't this magical, beautiful thing anymore. And I just was a shitty person. I had done this to my daughter. I had placed her here, and it was just dark. Really, 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 really dark.
Yeah. Talk about triggering all the trauma points, right? Every single trauma point that could be triggered, that could be buttons that could be pushed, was pushed.
Because what did I pride myself on? I was an amazing mom, and I had damaged those relationships. I was a good
but that damage all happened in the midst of triggers. It all happened in the midst of not knowing how to be this person, or who you're supposed to be, in being a mother to an adult child that you haven't had a relationship with her whole life, and having all of those regrets, and having resentment between you and her adoptive mother, and having resentment between all the daughters, all your daughters, having
and each piece of information that she would just be telling me stories, and they were horrific, and so every piece of information sent me into a trauma state again, and it was just this, perpetual trauma, because it was just horrifying. It could not be more polar opposite than the life that I was promised she would have. It could not have been more different than what it was. There's so few positive things from her childhood that it's difficult for me to even remember what they are. And they're stories told by her. And I did have a meeting with the adoptive mom a few months after she found me. My daughter wanted me to confront her about some of these things. And and damn well right, you better believe I'm going to. And so I brought my husband with me. Of course, he's my biggest support, and she's a single woman. And it was awful. It was awful. I went in and said, I brought my husband not to gang up on you, but because she was as much a father to her as her biological father was. He was there through every piece of this. He feels responsibility. He feels, I didn't tell her this, but he felt complete guilt over not having married me sooner. Complete guilt, to the point that my robot husband broke down in tears. And it just, the responsibility felt on him too. In this conversation, she took no accountability for anything that happened. None. Zero. She recognized the weakness. My weak spot was the biological father. and dug at it. Because I came on strong. I can come on pretty darn strong. And you get the mama bear in me, and I'm quite a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, not to say I wasn't scared to death, but I said a prayer before, so I was fine.
Right. Oh my gosh, I love that so much.
Oh, thank you for letting me use my humor. It's how I deflect off the things too.
That's how I deal with things too. I have to,
whatever. But, and so I went in guns a-blazing.
Me too.
And literally zero accountability. She tried to even diminish how long she was in the residential treatment facility and said it was just this short time and blah, blah, blah. And I called her out on it and was like, now let me just do the math here, and when I finally pinned her in the corner, she just looked at me and she's like, well, you weren't here, so you don't know. And I said, you're right, I wasn't, but you were, and you abandoned her. And so it didn't go well. And
so something that's coming to mind for me is like, and I'm guessing that this is maybe how you would have felt, because these are the thoughts that are coming for me, but
okay, I will.
Tell me if I'm wrong. But my thoughts are, if she didn't want her as her biological mother, or as her adoptive mother,
right?
You wanted her, and you would have taken her back in a heartbeat.
Any day, I would have taken her.
So, what was the? I know that's not like realistic, I guess, because of the way that adoption works. But honestly, like, if she didn't want her, and if she was a point of shame for her because she was
a teenager,
adopted by, but adopted from the time she was a baby, though, from the time she's 9 months old, she's like this representation of this marriage that didn't,
in which she used a
work,
man to get
right?
a baby. I mean, that's
exactly.
the bottom line of it.
And there's so many layers. It just makes it, it just feels gross. All of it feels gross.
I dive into it. And through all of this, I mean, I'm at my darkest of dark, and I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying. And it's another time that God's letting me down. And so whose fault is that? It's mine. It's my fault. I screwed it up. I'm a failure to everybody that I love more than anything in this world. And it's all my fault. And, I have a clear memory. I was still in the Relief Society presidency, and I just begged to be released, to have somebody have the inspiration, because I didn't have the courage, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it anymore. I can't go and be a support to other people when I am crumbling. I mean, I have nothing in me. My little puppy. No,
the snoring is so cute.
She's bored.
Oh, that was a yawn. Okay. She's like, can you just get over all the anxiety and trauma already? I'm exhausted from laying here next to you.
Yeah. Oh, there's I don't know what I do.
Oh man.
So
they're very sweet.
I got into therapy. I finally, my husband's like, why did you call another one? I'm like, because I'm too broken. And, I mean, I just felt like an awful person. And I got into this with this other therapist, and I hadn't had positive experiences with therapies. And I will say that my mom did put me in therapy for about a year in Seattle after I got pregnant. And again, we didn't talk much about it, but, and I did have a more positive experience with her. But on meeting this woman, my now current therapist, I told her on the intake form that I didn't like inner child work and what have you, just because I'd been so traumatized by it. And on first meeting, I walked in and I was like, yep, this will work. And she wanted to like tiptoe and be like, sometimes it takes a couple of sessions and whatever. And I was like, no, we're good. And she's like, well, I just want to give you, and I'm like, we're good, this will work. and it was like, it's just been, I don't know what I would do without her. I mean, honestly, she's been she actually used to work for LDS Social Services, and so she has insight. She has done the home checks for the adoption services. I could not have found a better therapist, and she is credit to why I can talk about the story today, and only be somewhat emotional, be appropriately emotional rather than suicidal, to be totally blunt. So I got into therapy with her. And one of the first things that happened, she was a member of the church, but I remember her challenging me on some of the narratives of the church. And again, like you were talking about Natasha Helfer, is that she was good mental health practices and challenging me on a couple things here or there. And it was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable because she should have known better because she was Mormon, right? And half the reason why I was scared to ever go to a therapist is because I didn't think they'd understand all of the Mormonness of my Mormonness, And so it was, but I trusted her. And so it would kind of ruminate like these little, like, one of the first ones that I remember was when she challenged what was ultimately my conditional love. And I was like, she's just doing all these things that are wrong. And she's like, whose definition of wrong? And I was like, it's just wrong. Like, we all know what's right and wrong, and, whatever. Yeah.
Do we?
Like,
do we though?
No, right? Good question. Do we though? But just started, kind of challenging me on that. And I ended up through that process finding out that I actually have something that's called cyclothymia, which is kind of like it's kind of like bipolar, but instead of having mania, your highs get to baseline. And so you live in this constant state of ups and downs where your ups are where people feel most of the time. And so my chronic depression that I had turned out to have just not necessarily been just depression, but the cyclical thing that I had lived with my whole life. And so lo and behold, I get on mood stabilizers and an antidepressant, and all of a sudden I can breathe, and there's a weight and the cloud is lifted, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I might survive. I might be able to get through this, and I can have clarity. And so I was able to, once I got medicated and could actually like come out of this darkness, we started building framework to establish a relationship again, my daughter and I rebuilt my relationship with my other two daughters of a lot of trust, and respected all the boundaries and did all kinds of boundary checks, ad nauseum, to make sure that I was honoring everybody's boundary and being honest to everybody, to a point of telling all the things instead of the necessary things. And so in the middle of, so she found me in 2016. We were mostly rebuilding starting 2020 during COVID. And so all of that had transpired. So it was, about a year and a half and then about 2 years or so of not really talking to each other. And for me, COVID, well, let me just say one more thing, is church started to become not a safe place for me anymore, because everybody there knew about my daughter. Everybody was on board. Like, let's envelop, she lived here for a short period of time, so let's just envelop her in love. And she became the project. We became the project. I was in the Relief Society presidency, and now I have to go back to church and people say, how's she doing? Not great. It's messy. And at the time, I didn't have any capability of not giving word vomit. And so even speaking was danger, because you tell these people these things, and they're like, I just want you to say you're fine. I don't want all that information. How you doing? You don't want to hear blah, the word vomit.
Well, because people in the church can't be honest, right? We can't be honest with each other about how we're doing. It's kind of that whole thing about, like, you walk past each other in the hall and it's, hi, how are you doing? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine.
Robots.
You just keep walking. Right. We can't give space for people to say, be real.
Life is shitty right now. It's really, really, really bad. And I don't even know if
Mm-hmm.
I've got my head above water. I think I've got my nose sometimes enough to catch.
Well, yeah, it's kind of
Right.
like, don't talk about it. Okay, you've told me this thing about what happened to you.
Right.
Now don't
And so
talk about it anymore.
then it reaffirms the
You
scarlet
know?
letter again, right? Like this is that much more
Mm-hmm.
because I'm at fault
Mm-hmm.
for all of this. I guess I didn't read my scriptures enough to make it so that it's better. I had gone to the bishop seeking help for how to reconcile how God could let this happen to my daughter. Like how do we explain this?
Mm-hmm.
And that poor man, he, he didn't know what to tell me. He opened the scriptures to the stupid Joseph
Right.
Smith, art thou greater than he, and the Doctrine and Covenants of like where art thou, and it's like just all of the crap of Joseph Smith was tormented, and so blah blah blah, the atonement, all the things, right?
So exactly what we do as Mormons is we think that our story and our problems and our traumas are not as bad as everybody else's. So therefore, if you go to the bishop and you're like, I'm really struggling right now, well, are you struggling as much as
Right.
Joseph did? Are you struggling as much as Jesus did? Because Jesus
Right.
was hung on the cross for you. Is it as bad of a story as
Right.
what happened to them? Well, then suck it up,
Right.
Buttercup, and go along
and
your
add
way,
to that
right?
I identified with Mary, and look how Mary is like celebrated, and
Yes.
her son was taken from her,
Right,
and
right.
whatever, lies and deceit and whatever. And so I'm not even, I mean, Mary had it worse than me, you know?
Yeah. But are you celebrated? Are you
Oh,
celebrated for giving
no.
your daughter up for adoption? Are you celebrated for going through a dark night of the soul and having, these panic attacks and having,
Right.
your
No,
complete come apart?
it's secret. You
Are
don't
you
talk about
celebrated for
that.
that?
Am I celebrated? Am I
Oh, because
celebrated
that's
for
real.
having figured out that I needed medication? No, like that is
Mm-mm.
shameful.
No.
One of the biggest moments
Mm-hmm.
in the church part was I was sitting in Relief Society, and the lesson was on mental health, and I was sitting next to a dear friend that we'd gone hiking together on the regular, and she's one of those people that you are having the deep conversations within 30 seconds of being together, and so we just always had the great conversations. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was sitting next to her, and they're talking about mental health, and it's all the read the scriptures, the atonement, the bullshit. My daughter went through a postpartum depression, and like, you people don't get it. Like, I've literally lived through hell, and
No.
other women in this room I
Mm-hmm.
know have lived through hell. And you're telling me your daughter experienced postpartum depression? I mean, sad for her. I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing, but
Mm-hmm.
let's not dismiss it with prayer, the atonement, scriptures, conference talks, the one talk. Let's not forget Holland's talk on the broken vessel. Like, holy cow, like it's prophetic, right? And it's bullshit. It's the most bullshit thing, that because all he does
Mm-hmm.
is give permission to go see a therapist. That's it. With the
Yeah.
connotation behind it of, and read your scriptures and pray, and you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine if you just
Yeah.
follow God's plan, right?
Because you're not doing
Right.
enough already. You're not doing enough of focusing
Right.
everything outside of yourself and focusing on everything outside of yourself and not
Right.
focusing on yourself to be able to heal.
But even in the face of saying all of that, the other thing that's thrown in at the end every single time, because if we can't make it work, endure to the end. Then that is your lot in life.
Oh my God.
That's your lot, right? You just, even if you have done every single thing you can do and the Lord doesn't see fit to take this from you, then that is your lesson. That's your lot. Endure it, and endure it joyfully.
Oh.
If I hear that one more time, it used to make me so angry. Not only endure, but don't murmur, endure it joyfully, don't complain, because again, don't feel anything, shove it down. And going back to what you said earlier, the Lord hath descended below them all. You aren't there yet. So zip it.
And be a robot.
And I mean, and there's
be a robot
compassion for death. Like, right? People understand the grieving process for death. These are two death experiences for me that I can't talk about. I mean, these talk about grief. I lost my daughter twice, and under the church's direction, I lost my daughter twice. And as a little girl, I was praying for help from God that didn't take away this awful thing. And I'm pleading with him at this point, please make this right. Please, please, please make this right. And sitting in this Relief Society lesson, going back to that, and just all the rhetoric. That's all it is just rhetoric. And I remember one girl was real and she was my friend. And I'm like, go girl, you know, you can say it. And I'm like, should I say something? And I realized this is probably the most unsafe environment I have ever been in to be able to share something this vulnerable. And I sat next to my friend and I said, have you ever had an anxiety attack? And she said, no. And I said, do you want to see one? And I put my hands up and they were just trembling. My eyes were filled with tears. And she was like, Myndee, what is going on? And she just held me and sat with me. And it was about 10 minutes before the lesson was done. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And my youngest was still in high school. And so we dutifully went to church, and I just sat arms folded and tight and would come home with a migraine every single week because the cognitive dissonance was so strong in me. And my husband was like, what's going on? Like, why, you know, here we are a team. She's the strong one, right? Quote unquote strong one. And I'm not the one with the doubts. And he's the one pulling us along right now. And he's like, if she doesn't want to do this, I don't want to do this, you know, kind of thing. And so COVID hit, and I had done enough therapy at this point in time that I was almost to the point of not blaming myself anymore. I could understand that I was a product of a broken institution and a time frame, right? Like the 1990s, and adoption was relevant in the situation, and that the validation from my therapist of what happened through LDS Social Services was wrong, outright wrong, was probably one of the biggest things, is that I needed that validation that I was wronged. And actually, I kind of want to go back for a second more because wanted to talk about forgiveness for a second. At one point, I remember, because I couldn't talk about all these hard feelings with my family, right? Because I have the Scarlet Letter, and we don't talk about mental health issues. We don't talk about, my parents didn't even know I was in therapy. We don't, you know, just buck up. You'll get through this. This is hard, but, you know, I'm sorry you're experiencing a hard time right now. What do you want for dinner on Sunday? You know, I mean, it's those kinds of conversations. And I flew actually down to Arizona and went to my parents' snowbird down in Mesa, and we drove from Mesa to Tucson to my niece's sealing. And on the way home from the sealing, I was driving and my dad was in the front seat and my mom was in the back seat. And remember, my dad is a CES teacher, and so in my mind, he's the one with all the answers. If there was ever a question, I go to my dad. He's got the answer for it. He can find the scripture. I always looked up to him as being the scriptorian and knowing all the things, you know, I mean, could always answer a question. And so, but we didn't have a really close relationship per se. I mean, I talked about how he didn't even talk to me in between that time period, but they spent a lot of time in our homes. My husband got along really, really great with them. We had a really good friendship with my parents, and I mean, still do to this point. You know, I mean, I have a really, really great relationship, but it's not a depth with my dad per se. And so I finally got up the nerve to tell him, you know, I just said, we got started talking about my daughter and all that had transpired, and finally I just said, Dad, I'm angry at God. I'm angry at God for having let this happen to my daughter, and it doesn't make sense, and I'm angry at the system. I'm just angry. And he goes, do you know what you need to do now? And my mind was, please, one with the answers, tell me what I need to do now. I've been searching. I went to the bishop. I've gone to everybody. Please tell me what I need to do now. And he goes, you need to ask Heavenly Father for forgiveness. And it crushed me it crushed me.
Can I just tell you, that makes me rage on your
Yeah.
behalf. I'm so
Thank
sorry.
you. And again, I don't hold him accountable because he's part of the system, right? He's devoted his life and it's provided for him. And he is an amazing teacher of a very broken system, of a very, very broken system. And so he is giving the best advice that he could possibly give me at that point, but it is sickening. It is sickening. And
well, he thinks he's saving you,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
he thinks he really, like,
yeah.
he really believes that that's the way to save you.
And it's going to bring me
Yeah.
peace, right? Like that's the whole
Right.
point in his mind, is this is going to bring me peace. And I can't say to him, Dad, I have never felt anything when I read the Book of Mormon except that I want to fall asleep. Like I have never, the closest I feel to God is when I'm in the shower. Like I can't tell him these things that are, that are so untraditional. At this point in time, I had found a relationship that I called God at that time, which is now, I believe, more just some higher being or something, through my dogs. My dogs are everything. And he started presenting, or she or it or whatever started finding peace through my dogs. And you can't get up in testimony meeting and bear your testimony of dogs. Like it's not the right rhetoric, And so I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. I don't know what I said the rest of the ride home. And the whole time I'm going, if God was loving, he would be pissed that this happened to my daughter too. He would be just as angry about all of this as I am, because she was mistreated and he doesn't want his children to hurt. And so I knew my dad was wrong. And it was like this massive fall from grace of like, holy cow, there's literally no one that's going to have the answers. And every person in the church that's supposed to have the answers has squat for me. And if anything, they're traumatizing, right? So then fast forward to COVID. Thank goodness for COVID. This was all, just slightly before. And all of a sudden, not going to church was the biggest relief ever. I had no idea the anxiety that church had been causing me. And we're seeing so many people that are in that same boat too, that, it's hard that they aren't coming back post COVID. And
Same.
yeah. And my husband was still trying to watch the sacrament meetings. We kind of did the sacrament a few times, but then like I started having him bless Diet Coke and donuts and, doing it a little bit on the irreverent side of things.
Okay. That is amazing. Actually, can I just say that? That's amazing.
Have you seen the video? There's a video on YouTube about pre-blessed food. I'll send it to you.
Yes, please
and
do.
You can
Please
see
do.
It. Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah.
And so we've always kind of been like nuanced type of people as it is, but that one was that's when I started feeling like, I can't do it. So he kept watching, and like every once in a while it was 9:00 in the morning. I'm not a morning person. And he'd come up and he's like, do you want to watch with me? And I'd fall back asleep. And then eventually he stopped. And so then when church opened back up, I started having anxiety attacks surrounding church, as it was anyway. And I'm like, this is wrong. Like, why am I going to something that's that's clearly this unsafe of a place for me? And so I started I'm like, I can't go back. I literally cannot go back. Like, I can't do that to myself. I've made so much mental progress. And mind you, during this time, I was in another deep depression because I'd had double foot surgery. And so I couldn't walk or anything. And so mentally, I was still in a hard state, but was able to make mental progression, right? Healing progression away from the church. And so it was really, really, really telling to me. That was such a big thing to me. So then I started kind of deconstructing of like, why is the church so unsafe? Like, what is it about the church? And started to listen to podcasts, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that's traumatized by the church. And it all became like the emotional abuse that had happened from the church on layer after layer after layer after layer, and being let down. And I still believed in God. I still wanted to believe in the church, but I didn't love so many of the teachings. And so I kind of adopted this. I really, really was ready to start rebuilding my relationship with my daughter. And so I adopted one of my new themes of life, and that's just radical acceptance. And I went to her and I was like, we're going to just kind of play things out one step at a time and build trust again. And whatever choices she makes in her life, I will just say, okay. And if it doesn't feel good to me, then that's my fault, not hers. It's not judgment whatsoever. And piece by piece, oh my gosh, it was exactly what she needed. It was how we built our relationship back again. And the only way that I could build that relationship and the relationship back with my daughters is to let go of the church. Also during COVID, my youngest daughter came out as not straight in whatever terms that is. And it doesn't matter, what, she's just not straight. The end. And that rocked my world too, because she's one of the best souls of that I've ever encountered in life. And I'm like, she's a way better person than me. If somebody deserves to be in the celestial kingdom, it's her, it's not me. And then thinking through, like, what does the celestial kingdom actually look like? And I'm like, I don't want to be part of that. Like, are you kidding me?
Oh my gosh, we say this all the time. My people are not going to be there. I don't want to be there.
Can you just imagine what it's like? Like, no, it's like the temple. Like, I never liked the temple. I'm loud laughter. Come on. Like, I am a loud laughter person. Why am I being shamed by loud laughter? And so I'm just imagining.
Did you know? They took out loud laughter.
Yeah,
I think
I heard that recently, and I was like, yeah, now that I've left the church. But at least they did, right?
Now you can go back.
Right. I'll go back.
Yay!
Not sober. I had a friend say that to me. She's like, let's just get our recommends again so that we can just go back and not be sober. And I'm like, hey, I might actually enjoy it.
and fall asleep and snore loudly through the sessions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Snore loudly instead of laugh loudly. I actually did laugh loudly one time. I was with some friends, and when I laugh, it just erupts from my toes, right? And I was in there with my friends, and I went, bah! In the temple, and one of the ladies, and I was like, what? If the temple's not about having joy, right? I'm sitting here with my friends and enjoying.
Well, now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now your answer is.
Yes, 100%. Yep. Right back at you.
Yeah.
So my daughter comes out, and I'm saying, I can't be part of an organization that doesn't support her, that is not affirming to her. And I mean, I'm going to be totally brutally honest on this one. I screwed up when she came out to me. It took me, I was blindsided. I was an advocate for a lot of other people that were in my life, but I did not expect it from her because she doesn't present that way. She was my little girl who loved princesses and pink. Her favorite color was pinkish, purplish sparkle. She just didn't present, and I was so uninformed. And I had to really, really, really dig down and decide if I was going to hold my beliefs or have a relationship with my child. And I chose my daughter. And what that meant is that I couldn't be part of something that was going to harm her. And I wasn't going to be the woman, the mom that sat in church that had the gay child. Like, that's just not going to be me. And I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Same story with me.
Really?
My kid coming out saved my life. I say it all the time. That was the one thing that just pushed me over the edge to let me start looking at everything and
because you have to challenge your own, it turns out, very homophobic views. I mean,
yes. And just like you, I said, I can't continue to give money to or support an organization that's telling my child they have no place with God. Right. Didn't work for me. Peace out. Bye-bye.
That they're less of a person than I am, and I look shitty compared to her. I mean,
that's how I feel about my kid. Yeah. Like the most amazing, ginormous soul you can imagine.
Yes, exactly. And so then that also opened it up to my oldest daughter. It's like, why isn't the church have place for her too? And my middle oldest child had been married in the temple during this time and had not gone back to church afterwards, and she was far from leaving the church. A side note that's kind of funny is she stopped wearing her garments, and my mom saw her one time. She said, "Have you talked to her about not wearing garments?" And I said, "Yeah, Mom, I have, and they're her choices." And I just don't want her to get in any bad habits. I was like, well, they're her habits to have.
Ow.
In what world is it okay to talk about people's underwear, right? Like,
exactly.
Right.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep. Exactly.
yeah.
It's
Anyway,
gross.
yeah,
It's really gross.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
But let's talk about purity culture and
Mm-hmm.
talk about people's underwear and how they need to be chaste. Why are we talking about underwear if we're going to be chaste? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't wear any underwear, then you will be chaste.
Right.
Sorry.
Oh my gosh, I love your sense of humor so much.
It might be by the police, but you will be chaste.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's amazing. So it just made me have to challenge every single belief structure that I had, because she really is the best soul. And if there's not room for any of my daughters in the church because my middle daughter is not taking to it, and her husband's questioning it too, and they're great. Their marriage is, I mean, they have a really, really, really great marriage, but it's Mormon unconventional too because he didn't serve a mission, and they got married really, really young, and he got shamed for that. So there's just I love my kids so much, and there's not room for them in this, and so I just stepped away and I said, I don't want anything to do with this right now, and I can't see myself going back. And delved into all of these podcasts. And it wasn't until probably the last several months that I just started like approaching the truth claims, and my mind's like, how, how, how? And I don't even necessarily want to go into that because I'll get off onto a rant that will be another 4 hours. But just opening up to the truth claims. But the bottom line of it is the further away from the church I got, the more peace I found, the better my relationships became. My husband and I, we could never talk about church ever because we were not on the same page. And all of a sudden, we have all the things to talk about. There's no conversation that's off limits anymore. My girls, I can have healthy conversations with them about all of the things that are, that before I would have been like, oh, what's I'm a failure as a mom. I remember on the way to my receiving her endowment, she goes, my one problem, Mom, is that why does he get to know my name and I don't get to know his? And it was the first time I'd ever heard that, and I was like, oh my gosh, I failed as a mother. That was my first thing. And I said, I don't know, sweetie, it's just the way that it is. And I'm like, oh, I didn't fully prepare her. Like, she was more in tune to things than I was. And
Yeah.
so so that's basically how where the deconstruction goes from there. And then it all, it's just history from there. But as far as the relationship with my daughter goes, is she, little by little, she started to trust me again and understand that I genuinely was building a relationship of radical acceptance. And what grew from that was actually challenging to understand it, not just be like, I accept you where you are, but please explain to me how you came to that. And I never thought of it that way. Let me think about that for a minute. And through that comes just deep understanding of how she thinks and how life has shaped her. And because of that, we can embrace what her life was. Not embrace, that's the wrong word, but our traumas also create who we are. And if you try to shove those traumas away, you're shoving a huge piece of who shaped you, what shaped you to be. And so in a lot of ways, you do have to embrace the hard stuff too. And part of the forgiveness thing that just makes me so angry with the church is we need to forgive, we need to forgive, we need to forgive. Well, this woman has never earned my forgiveness. It's not fair to tell me that I need to forgive her. I am capable of forgiving so many people for so many awful things. But this woman, I'm okay to hate her the rest of my life. It's okay. It's okay because she's deserves that, and I would be willing to absolve that. And so by embracing that is also validation to her, right? That it's validation to her that this was wrong. This was wrong. What you experienced in life was wrong. And it was worse than you are telling yourself that it is. And it does continue to haunt you to this day. And you will forever have things that are going to creep up, and they're wrong. And I'm sorry. And being away from the church has created the most beautiful relationships I've ever had. And it breaks my heart that I had to choose to push my parents aside with that great relationship in order to develop these relationships of my immediate family. But I would make the choice over and over again, because what's been created is my daughters are all in communication again, and they, because I built trust with each one of them individually, they could build trust with each other again. And none of this is thanks to the church. None. And my biggest thing at this point in time is just, I would love the church to be accountable. Like, it's just come out that they're billions of dollars, right? Why not just come forward and say, you know what, there was a lot of damage done. Here's some free counseling for anybody that wanted it. Here's some education. Here's some whatever, anything to do with the money. And I would be willing to look over the truth claims of how the church was established, right? To be, and well, no, there'd have to be a lot of other things that changed. but the point, maybe it could resolve some of my anger issues and, you know, what have you, is just be accountable. We all screw up. What do we do as parents? The only way that I can rebuild trust with my girls is to say, yeah, I screwed up and I'm really sorry. And that doesn't mean what I did was okay. And it doesn't take away from the fact that it really, really hurt you. But I'm sorry, I know better, and I'm going to do better, and I'm going to show you that I'm going to do better, right? And that's how we have trusting relationships, and the church is unwilling to do that.
Yeah. You have to take ownership.
You have to.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, something that I was thinking about with you saying that is that even if the church did come forward and say, we'll pay for counseling, we'll pay for, you know, whatever to help you to resolve your differences with us, or to come to terms with what's happened, is that there is no trust there.
Right.
So even if they did that, I would believe that their intentions, they had ulterior motives.
For sure.
It would not just be out of the goodness of their heart, and because they're recognizing that they need to be accountable for the shit that they've pulled on us and the trauma that they've caused for us.
Right.
There would be an ulterior motive. Like, we'll give you counseling if you come work in the bishop's storehouse.
Yeah.
We'll give you counseling, but you have to come back to church and start, you know, taking the sacrament. You have to give out this many Book of Mormons. You have to blah, blah, blah.
Well, because the church,
you have to hold a calling.
The church is transactional. Yes. And that's the thing that I found the very, very most about this relationship with God, is it was 100% transactional. If I give my daughter to you, you will then take care of her, right? If I then you. And the only way that I found peace now is just accepting, right? Like, just accepting that shit happens. And my life has had, I mean, how long have we been talking now? You know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that to deconstruct and to accept, but there's nothing. Just be accountable. That's it. Just be accountable, and it's enough. Being accountable to me is even more important than any apology ever would be. Just a simple, absolutely, yes, that happened, and I'm sorry is helpful.
But they will never do that. They will just change the narrative and change the rules and change the, you know, the temple ceremony and not tell anybody.
Yes.
Just like I was raised on, Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon from the gold plates.
Right.
When my kids came home and we were talking about it, and they said, what about the seer stone? And I'm like, the what?
Right. Right. What?
And then
about? The one for
me, and then just
one for me
magically, it's not even in there anymore that he translated it from the book or from the gold plates.
Right. The one that was for me was when I learned that Joseph Smith had a glass of wine the night before he was killed. And when I was, I mean, the story we were told as kids was, you know, he refused alcohol when he had a surgery at 8 years old, and abstain, you know, whatever. And he had alcohol the night before. And the thing for me was like, I had never drinking until recently. And when I started deconstructing that, even, I'm like, that is my only thing that I feel like I have in the church any value, because I wasn't this, I wasn't that, I wasn't this, I wasn't that, but I never tasted alcohol and I never said the F word. Those are my two things that I was like, I know I haven't until just recently.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's kind of freeing, isn't it? Like when you actually,
it is,
but I still hesitate to say it. Like, it's still like this thing for me. But
oh yeah,
when
sorry,
I find
it's my
out,
favorite
you know,
word.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
I'm embracing it. I'm embracing it, but it doesn't just smooth out really easily. But to have those two things be my value in the church, come on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it turns out I'm actually a really awesome person. And
I believe
can
that.
drink alcohol.
100%.
And
yeah, you can.
Yeah.
And you can say the word.
Yes. I can't say it. I can't say it. You say it for me.
Fuck.
Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome.
One of my sisters says it, and anyway, I don't want to go into it too much, but I'll call her and I'll be like, "Can you just say it for me?" I don't know. It's a thing. We all have our little things that we hold on to, right? Like it's just one of those things, and
yeah,
it just is. But it's just sick that that's what my value was. Like, you guys have been talking to me for a while. I'm funny. I'm smart. I don't mean all of those things in an arrogant way, but I can embrace myself, and I can be me, and I'm pretty awesome, and I do really good things in the world, and I drink alcohol.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you right now that you're fucking amazing.
Thank you.
I concur. You are.
Thank you.
And yes, you can say all of those things about yourself, and I would never think you were arrogant, because I concur with that too.
Thank you. Yeah. No,
You're welcome.
But to have my value hinge on such fruitless things that turns out are bullshit. Joseph Smith drank the night before he died. Like, what the crap? What is that even? And I just learned that as an adult. Like,
no, only the anti-Mormons would say that.
Right. Right.
It didn't really happen.
Right.
You know?
No, those are lies. Lies.
Those are all lies. Those are all lies.
It's like, oh, look over here. No, we don't want to talk about those things. And yeah.
Well, then
that's anti-Mormon literature.
Yes, for sure.
He also lied about having a 14-year-old bride and stealing people's wives and all those things are all and they're all lies. And I am a proud anti-Mormon. Thank you very much.
That's where I kind of am still having a hard time because of the truth claims. I don't know where I fit in that. Because part of it, I was talking about how you have to embrace your trauma. I have to embrace that I'm Mormon. I was raised Mormon, right? And it's part of who I am, and it's never going to leave me for good and for bad, right? And so I don't like to say I'm ex-Mormon because I'll always be Mormon. Right?
Yeah.
I don't practice and I don't believe any of it, but it is who I am.
Well, you'll learn to say you're not German anymore.
Right.
I mean, it's in your blood.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I do see it as a community like Judaism is, that it is its own thing. And
culture. Yeah,
its own culture. And it's part of, and I don't want to take away the good. Like I was saying, my husband and I, it brought us together. It gave us a good foundation for raising our daughters. And as a launch pad, it just doesn't fit anymore. It just doesn't fit.
Right.
And we were lucky and we took mostly the good. And I am grateful that I've done the work, that I can now repair the stuff with my girls and with my husband and with myself that were damaging. And I say all the time, I'm like, I'm sorry for the things I said when I was Mormon.
Yes.
It really is like, I'm baffled. They'll tell me something that I would say or do, and I'm like, I did? Oh my gosh. And I love the person I am so much more now. So much more because I can see me.
Yeah.
And
I can see you too.
Thank you. And I see you guys, and you guys are awesome. So awesome.
And I think you're pretty amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it. So I think that's, I think that's probably pretty close to a lot of the things. I mean, I have tons of notes, but I think the basic gist of it is just, that it's okay to be angry. It's okay to not forgive. It's okay to be an awesome person outside of the church. And when the rhetoric of that there's never any happiness outside of the church, it's just blah, 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 blah. That's not true. It's not true. I have more peace as a person now and in my relationships than I've ever had before. So
Same. Same.
Yeah.
You'll learn to embrace the word or the title apostate.
That one I am getting. That one I am like embracing a little bit more, because that truly is the sin next to murder, where sex isn't. It shouldn't be.
Well, and is it really though? Have you looked up the word apostate, what it means?
Yeah, no. I mean, yes, I have looked it up, and no, it's not the sin next to murder, but I'm actually,
it's not even a bad thing.
Right.
Like, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be an apostate.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. To speak your truth.
Yeah.
And to buck the system, and to think, to use.
Be a critical thinker.
I'm a critical thinker in every other aspect of my life. Like, I dissect things ad nauseum. I cannot believe I never applied it to church. I mean,
it wasn't safe. You couldn't.
No. And I'm just saying the indoctrination and I mean, that's why there was so much cognitive dissonance, right? Is because it just is so powerful until you can come to the point of being like, I need to figure out what's going on. And so I don't fault people for staying in the church. I don't in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
At all.
No. And let me clarify. I actually am, apostate is the better word for me than anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a difference. I'm a proud apostate. Yeah. So our recording got interrupted. But we were talking about, I had asked if you had anything else you wanted to add to your story, and we kind of got into a discussion about how much easier it is to love people without judgment and to be open to all kinds of things.
Yeah. I loved what you said, and I mean, I'll just reiterate it now of having your eyes and your ears open. But the other part of that too, that maybe you can add, or I will add, is in my heart too. Have my heart open with it too, of
100%,
with the intent to understand. That's the whole point. The intent to understand it. I mean, I've always had an obsession with serial killers and what have you.
Me too.
Why am I not surprised?
Me too. Come on, we lived in Green River Killer territory and Ted Bundy territory.
And guess what? He was in Florida too. So Washington, Florida, and Utah, my 3 states.
That's right.
He abducted a girl from the high school I graduated from. So
anyway, there you go.
Yeah. So I've always felt an affinity to them because they grew up they were just children once too, right?
Oh my gosh, I've never heard anybody else say that. I say it all the time. Yes, I say all the time.
Oh my gosh.
People think I'm crazy because part of the reason that I have been obsessed with career criminals and serial killers is because I'm fascinated by the sociopathic mind.
Yes.
Because I want to get inside and figure out what makes them tick. And I actually have a lot of compassion for them.
Yes.
Because it is not normal to be born wanting to take human lives. That's not normal. Right. Something happened in that brain to make them, whether it was childhood abuse, whether it was a birth issue, whether they just developed in
100%.
utero that way, but that is not, it's not normal. And so I've always just, like you, I'm always fascinated with true crime, and I am always curious to know what makes people tick.
Because it gives monsters a soul.
Absolutely. And they do have one.
And the other part of it too is when you're talking God and evil, it removes the evil, right? Like evil becomes about actions and less
what is
about
evil?
People.
Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, the church was evil towards me. I mean,
absolutely.
100% evil under the guise of a God. And and that's evil. And I mean, not to say that I absolve serial killers or anything, but
so when you talk about giving monsters a human soul, I think that's also, and I'm speaking for you, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is, you have said more than once in this interview that you don't hold your parents at fault. You're not angry at them because they were victims of this system too. And I have to concur. I'm mad at the institution. I'm less mad at people because I was that person once. I was caged in that system once. I thought the same things. I had those same feelings of, oh, those poor people, maybe their lives wouldn't be so effed up if they would just embrace the gospel. Maybe this would be better if they would just make better choices. I was that person. So how can I be so angry at individual human beings who are still in that paradigm and haven't been able to wake up out of it?
Right.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, many of them, it would devastate them because it's all they have in the world. You know, I mean,
It
I'm
devastated
fortunate.
me.
Yeah. Well, sure, it devastates, but I have a husband who supports me. My children are part of this and they are willing to forgive me and, you know, whatever. I have an amazing support system around and leaving the church.
Same.
And I, you know, my siblings are supportive. My mom actually was surprisingly more supportive than I thought she was going to be when I told her I wasn't going to church. She actually said she understood how the church probably caused trauma to me. And I
Yeah.
was shocked that she would use the word trauma.
Yeah.
But
That's a very
yeah.
mature,
Mm-hmm.
surprising take for
Yeah.
somebody on the
Yeah,
inside.
I
Yeah.
really, really felt very validated by it. I don't think they know just how far out I am.
Mm-hmm.
When I talked to her about it, it wasn't any of the truth claims. It was
Sure.
all the emotional stuff, and which is valid enough for the rest of their lives anyway. They're at a point now that I don't
Absolutely.
need to challenge them on this. You know, I
Right.
mean,
Right.
it's fine, and the they couldn't leave the church. It's too
Yeah.
part of who they are, and that it would. It's not. I don't want them to. I don't want them to. And so that's why I can't, I mean, I have to not find fault is because it's what's given them their lives. I mean, my
Yep.
dad, it's what sustained us, and right or
And
wrong. I mean,
they find peace and happiness in
yeah,
it, you know, and we
yeah,
can all, that's the hard part too, I think, coming on the outside is you want to kind of save everybody from it. Oh, let me, you know, I have a friend that's kind of newly out of the church and she's just like, what do I say to people? Like, how do I help them see it? And I said,
right.
you can't. You just have to accept them for where they're at, just like you want them to accept you for where you're at. If they find peace and happiness in that, it sucks and you see things that they don't see, but we all have our own paths to walk, right? I
Mm-hmm. And
mean,
we all see life through our own myopic lens.
yes,
And
100%.
the only way that we can get out of that myopic, the only way really to do that is to listen to understand, right? That
Yep.
there's
Mm-hmm.
so many more stories that are so different than mine. You know, one of my friends, one of my very dear friends when I lived in Florida was a Black woman raised in the 60s in Chicago. And I lived there during the Romney Obama campaign, and she was very pro Obama, and I was very Mormon and very pro Romney. And she and I had the most beautiful relationship because we could listen to each other and understand each other with the most
Mm-hmm.
polar opposite life
Mm-hmm.
experiences. And, you know, I mean, I was ultra conservative at that point in time, and she was very much not so. And we could listen and
Mm-hmm.
understand. And I could look at her
Mm-hmm.
and go, I can see why he resonates with you, you know?
Yep.
And if that's,
Yeah.
and if you approach life that way, it's, oh my gosh, people are amazingly curious. You know, I mean, that's just the curiosity of life. And one of the things, though, that I've learned through therapy, the very, very most, though, is that to have that same curiosity with ourselves, right?
Yes.
Like
Mm-hmm.
when triggers and things come up, that there's not a good or bad. There's not a right or wrong like we've always thought there was. Is that too loud with her chewing?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's not a right or wrong in any way that we have to process through all of this stuff. That just be curious. Where's this coming from? Who, you know, I've done a lot of IFS, interfamily systems therapy work.
Yep.
Holy, it is the way that I've done EMDR, DBT, CBT, talk therapy. You know, I've done all of them. And the one that resonates best with me, they've all had their positives, is this IFS, because I'm able to identify of who's talking to me. What are they trying to say? Let's throw some compassion towards them. You know, let's embrace where this is coming from. And, you know, I mean, and it's been amazing to that Mormon Myndee still can have a voice in me. Right. And that birth mom Myndee is entitled to all of these feelings that she experiences, and that there can be rage, and the rest of the Myndees can have rage with her, you know, and to find the curiosity in others, but in ourselves, oh my gosh, like that, there's a long ways to go.
Huge part of healing.
And there's, I mean, triggers and gut punches are going to come up for the rest of my life. They always will.
I say that all the time. This is a journey that it's a journey, not a destination. And I'll be on the journey for the rest of my life. And actually, I'm good with that. I don't ever want to get to a place where I've said I'm quote unquote healed, because if I do
Agreed.
that, then you don't remain curious anymore, right? So
Right, exactly. And that's, I mean, and that's the, I want to be able to evolve. And if you put yourself in the box of right and wrong, there's no evolution, and there's no way to embrace all the other things. Like I just look at my life that I had these blinders on, and now all of a sudden I'm looking and there's endless possibilities, and we were taught to be uncomfortable with not knowing,
with
right? We had,
uncertainty.
yes.
Yes, it's interesting you say that. My life motto, I made this up myself. This is just my thing. I'm going to have it tattooed on my body somewhere someday. I keep saying that.
I have a tattoo
When
of my new motto.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I'll show it to you.
Okay.
But go ahead, you tell me yours.
My motto is, when nothing is certain, anything is possible. And I came up with that shortly after I left, when I told myself I was going to keep my eyes and ears open, and realized just how true it is. And you're right. People inside are very uncomfortable with uncertainty, because within the Mormon paradigm, we were raised to know that we had a very linear path in life. You're
Right.
born, and then you do the following things. And then you become a youth and you do things, you serve a mission, you marry in the temple, you raise kids, you do temple work, you go to heaven. Like, this is very spelled out. It's very certain. When you walk away from Mormonism, a lot of people say they go into deep depressions because nothing is certain anymore. I feel really lucky because I've been able to flip that narrative. And for me, there's so much beauty in uncertainty. I love it. I thrive on it. I have no expectations anymore of anything. I just let things happen as they're going to happen. And life is an adventure.
Well, yeah. And I just can't get enough information. I want to know all the things. I want to know everything about everything, and I don't have enough time in the day to listen to all the things I want to and watch
Drink
all the
it
things
all
that
in.
Yeah, like, because there's so much out there. When you think about, like, even in relation to what my story is, and the adoption and the abuse and all of that, the knowing is, well, there's got to be a reason.
Right.
You know what? There's not. There's no
There's
reason.
not. Sometimes shitty things happen, and it's not because I did anything wrong. It's not because somebody's being punished. It's just life, and shitty shit happens.
Right. And this woman's an awful person. The end.
Right.
There's
That's it.
There's no,
your worthiness is not tied to any of this.
Right. Exactly. And I don't need to find a reason why she did the things that she did. There's no reason. There's nothing that justifies it. None.
Correct.
And I mean, I can find beauty in Ted Bundy, but I can't find beauty in her journey. Like, I tell everybody,
okay.
Yeah. And I tell everybody, you know what? In my mind, you don't get to speak positively about her. If you want to have those thoughts, you can. But if you're going to support me, we don't have those positive thoughts. And if that ever changes, and I'm willing to unload and look at what created her to be who she is, then I'll let you know. But until then, she's the one person I'm not going to investigate a whole lot more or give grace to. So that's my life motto is grace finds beauty in everything. I will extend grace to everybody and everything except her. And again, if she did anything for accountability, I would be willing to extend that to her too. Anything for accountability.
That's part of your own autonomy too, especially coming out of a paradigm that told you had to forgive everybody.
Right.
This is also a way of taking back your own power, taking back your own autonomy. I get to decide who I extend forgiveness to. I get to decide, those things. Nobody gets to decide that for me.
Well, and I mean, people say you want to get out of the anger phase. No, I love the anger phase. I have the right to be angry, and how liberating is it to be angry and to not feel any guilt about being angry.
Nope. Anger is a valid emotion, and I tell people all the time, some of the greatest movements in our lifetime would not have come about without anger. Civil rights movement, gay marriage, equal rights. None of this stuff would have come to fruition if people hadn't gotten really, really pissed off and angry.
Right.
So
exactly. I wouldn't be here telling my story if I wasn't angry.
Right.
I mean, that's the whole bottom line of it, is there has to be anger because it's protective too.
It
It's
is
protective
protective.
too. And it's validating. And
Mm-hmm.
I love being angry right now.
Feel
Love
it
it. I
all.
know. I love it. And that's the beauty, is I can be angry.
It
I can
is.
hate her, and I can
Yep.
love myself, and I can look at
Yep.
myself and go, you know what? I'm a really damn good person. My
Yep.
granddaughters love me for me, and she is so
Mm-hmm.
threatened by me. Oh my gosh, she is so threatened by
I'm sure
me.
she is.
And she hates me for no reason
She
whatsoever.
made her bed. Now she's got to sleep in that.
Right,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
And I will continue to be my person and be the good
Mm-hmm.
person that messes up, but is accountable.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
accountable. And you tell me that I'm screwing up, and I'll say, I'll do my best to change that. And I'll try, and I'll show you the ways that I'm trying to change it,
Mm-hmm.
because I
Mm-hmm.
want to continue to evolve as a person. I don't want to get stuck in the Mormon narrative ever, ever, ever again. And if I'm in a box,
Right.
please tell me. I want to get out of that box. I
Mm-hmm.
want to expand my knowledge.
Amen.
Yes. Yes. And I
Yeah.
won't recognize that I'm in a box. I mean,
Right.
that's the hardest thing,
Right.
is
No, it's
to,
true.
yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want people to tell me that I'm doing things that make them uncomfortable, because it helps me to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
and the notion of no right or wrong is like, oh, it's my favorite thing in the world. There's no
Mm-hmm.
right or
Me
wrong. There's
too.
only right for you
That's right. And it's
and
very
wrong for
freeing.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that probably does come close to summing up my story.
Well,
As
Myndee, I think you're an amazing human. I
Thank you.
feel like we are fast friends now.
Yes. Agreed.
I really do. I'm happy for you because you've been through a lot, you've experienced a lot, and somehow through it all, you have found a way to find the beauty,
Thank
and
you.
that's hard to do. But I also validate your feelings and just feeling everything and feeling where you are. But
Thank you. It represents a
thank you
lot of
for
hard work. It does. And
yeah.
and
And you deserve to have that acknowledged because
thank
healing
you.
is not easy. It's
No.
hard work. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I
Well, thank
appreciate
you
that.
for being vulnerable and for sharing your story. It's certainly a facet of Mormon life that a lot of people don't know about and don't have firsthand knowledge of. I know for a fact that people are gonna resonate with this story and connect with it. And you just never know who else you can affect and help on their healing journey. So
Thank you.
we do appreciate you trusting us to be a safe place to tell that story.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to share it. It's hard, it's scary, but it's very, very healing as well.
Yeah.
And so I do hope that somebody else hearing this will help them to heal a little too. There's a lot of damage that was done. Adoption is awful. It's
Mm-hmm.
awful. And I know that there's positive stories out there. I'd love to know more of them. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
experienced them. I know there's beautiful, wonderful adoptive parents out there that love their children and are the best
Mm-hmm.
parents to them. I know a handful of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it can be a really, really beautiful process. I wish that I could have experienced it that way. And I know that many others
Absolutely.
experience it like I did too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
So
that's
thank you for
valid.
giving me the
Yeah.
opportunity to share it and hopefully help
You're
others too.
welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life, can remind us that we are not alone in this.
was born when rose-colored water had seeped into my eyes and soul, and I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful, but no amount of sweet addiction can stop the force of reality. In the bitter recognition, only you can set you free. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow. My mother's blood runs through my veins. We haven't spoken years. If we did, maybe I'd ask, what's it like to become your worst enemy? And there's two sides to every story, carved by pain and memory. Time will soften all the edges, but it's still stone I keep with me. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me